The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews.
Yes, good evening. Hello, this is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and welcome to another live stream, live reading. We're back after a 2-week hiatus. Life got in the way. There was illness involved, there was family involved, there was events out of my control, and you might be able to hear that I'm still getting over the illness. It's kind of lingering, and it's not very pleasant, and it's the second time I've been sick in 2 months, which is really unusual for me. I don't usually get sick that often, and it doesn't usually linger this long. But I've been juicing fresh organic oranges and getting plenty of orange juice and vitamin C from that. I haven't been getting enough vitamin D from the sun because there is no sun in England. They're blocking that out and getting rid of it. And now we just have cloud and a dismal grey kind of fluffy blanket that goes from one horizon to the other. It's pretty gloomy, and so there's also that as well. It's not very pleasant, but forgive me. I wanted to get a live stream done after having a couple of weeks off because I don't like missing these. It's part of the discipline and the routine to keep up, showing up and doing the reading and doing the work, and I enjoyed doing these, and so I wanted to press on tonight and give it a go. So here I am. Apologies once again for the stuffy sounding, nasally, interfered with voice, but we're going to have to just do the best we can with what we've got. I might also be muting myself to cough and clear tubes and sip drinks as well throughout tonight's broadcast, but thank you for bearing with me. We're going to be continuing tonight with Foundations by Rene. We made a start on it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, actually. And it's a really infamous book. It's detailing a very important part of the picture, which are the power blocks known as tax-exempt philanthropic charitable foundations. Now, it's an interesting word to use, the foundations, right? Because what is a foundation? After all, a foundation is something you build on top of. And who likes to build? Just notice my little bar at the bottom there is kind of a funny size. There's certain people who like to build. And before you can build, you need a foundation. And so it's interesting that they've used this word for these organizations because as we were learning in the introductory part of the book, these serve a lot of different functions and they've come under scrutiny many times before this book was written. In fact, we learned about a few previous investigations into the role that these organizations play. But it's significant that they're called foundations because these go at the bottom of the structure. And if you get the foundation of something wrong, then whatever you build on top of it's going to fall over. It's not going to be much good. It's going to be unreliable. It might collapse. It might not last a very long time. And so these foundations need to be strong and sturdy. They need to be done properly. Otherwise, the thing that you are trying to accomplish is not going to stand the test of time. And so what we learned about in the first part of the book was a little bit of the history of these organizations and a little bit about what this particular book is about. So the first thing I'm going to do tonight is get into just a little bit of recap of what we learned in part 1 of this series. It's quite a big book. I think this series is going to go on for quite a number of weeks and months, in fact, because it's going to be one of those. It's just going to take us a while to get through it. And so the notes. So let's head over to my little notes, and I'll recap a little bit. So Reese, B. Carroll Reese, this is who gives his name to the Reese committee that carried out this investigation of foundations. He said that this was the most difficult assignment of his career, 30-year career, in fact, not just of his career, but of 30 years. This is the most difficult thing he's ever had to do. And there was a prior committee, and it was called the Cox Committee, and that had been put together, and they'd investigated the foundations as well. And the unanswered leftover question, according to Reese, was, to what extent, if any, are the funds of the large foundations aiding and abetting Marxist tendencies in the United States? So this question, this leftover question, which the Cox Committee was unable to answer, feeds into our studies on the Fabian Socialists and Roselle Martin's work in Fabian Freeway, and gives us a little bit of the frame within which this Reese Committee investigation into the foundations was carried out. And then he tells us as well in the introduction that this book is the story. It's a narrative because it contains the story of the harassments that the committee underwent when they were carrying out this investigation, as well as the philosophical and juridical reflections of Wormser, Rene Wormser, who wrote the book and was basically the head honcho in this committee, in the Reese Committee. So then we moved on to the introduction, which was written by Rene Wormser. And in that introduction, we learned about how, Rene Wormser quoted a journalist who pointed out that there was an incredible fact, which is that the fortunes made under free enterprise are being used to destroy or discredit the free enterprise system which gave them birth. So he's referring here to the Ford family and corporation, the Rockefellers, who had Standard Oil, of course, Carnegie. These were all industrialists who made their vast sums of money under the free enterprise system, but then utilized all that money by way of the foundations to destroy or discredit that very system which brought them up to their incredible levels of wealth and power in the first place, which is kind of like kicking the ladder down once you've climbed up to safety, right? It reminds us of this quote often attributed to Rockefeller, who said that competition, I think he said, competition is a sin or something like that. And I think it was attributed to him. I could be misremembering that there, so apologies. But I think what we got to remember here is this is part of how these systems transform. This is planned. This is done on purpose, that no system is ever put in place to last forever. And they know that. They know that, for example, the fiat currency system only ever lasts up to 60 years. And then after that, there'll have to be some sort of correction, some sort of financial reset, usually in the form of a Great Depression or a hyperinflationary scenario. For a bit more information about that topic, you might want to go to this book here, The Everything List, which I have mentioned before, but I interviewed the author last week, Clive Foster, and so that interview's up on the channel now. You can look that up. Hayes Interviews, episode 3. Clive Foster. We did an hour and 20 minutes, I think, discussing The Everything List. Buy the book, support him. He's a good guy. He's done his homework, and this is a really excellent account of how the systems that we are born into, the systems that are put in place, they're designed to only last a certain amount of time. And this is known by the people who design them. It's not accidental. And because these systems always give way to entropy, they have to plan the system after that. and they have to plan the transition into the system after that. And so that's what we're going to be living through in the near future, is this transition from the fiat currency. The fiat currency is being backed by nothing since 1971, the day that money died, when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, and that made all the world's currencies backed by nothing, which gave us about 60 years. You know, we're coming up on 55 years now since 1971. Well, we're in the 56th year. And so, the 55th year, sorry, my math is not very good. Did I mention I'm a bit sick? And so we're going to be living through whatever comes next. And that's what the everything list is all about, because it's going to be a sort of digital currency. It's going to be a tokenized system. Everything will become tokenized, which means it'll have an electronic token attached to it. And that'll apply to human beings. That will apply to land, to natural resources, to everything, all things. It's the everything list, right? So everything is going on this list. Everything is going to be tokenized. And then once it's tokenized, these tokens can be divided up to infinite tiny pieces and slices, and then they can be traded, and then they can be used as collateral for debt, which is for loans, which is how money is created, right? Money is debt. Cash is debt. That was one of the big lessons that crystallized in my mind from reading that book, is that cash is debt. And if you took all the cash and paid off the debt, the cash would disappear, because when the debt disappears, the cash disappears. So cash only exists because it's debt, and you have to keep creating more cash by creating more debt. And you have to keep doing that to keep the system alive by putting liquidity into it. And so Clive described the current system that we're living in. He said that since the 2008 crisis, this system's been on life support. And then during COVID, that was an adrenaline shot to the heart of this dying, basically dead system. And now we're just living through the effects of that adrenaline shot to the heart, and it's going to collapse and it's going to die. And so CBDCs, programmable digital currencies, surveillance, the everything list, tokenization, technocracy, to put a word on it. That's what we're heading into. And on the subject of technocracy, I also recently did an interview with Patrick Wood and Courtney Turner, who brought out a book called The Final Betrayal: How Technocracy Destroyed America. Very slender volume, and it's an easy read, but it's packed full of just what has been going on since Trump got in for his second term, and all the technocrats that are surrounding him, that are infesting Washington, and the companies that they're associated with, and the legislation that's being pushed through, really just setting the stage for this total surveillance control system in which everything will be tokenized. And by way of tokenization, the population's behavior will be managed down to an individual level, because the technology exists to be able to do that now. So what does all this have to do with foundations? Well, this book was written in the 50s. It was published in 1958. And it gives us an insight into this process of reinventing systems, of changing things, of creating mechanisms, legal mechanisms by which wealth can be stored and moved around and allocated and utilized in order to create the kind of systems that will basically remove competition, right? So there will be no competition for those at the top, for those elite people at the top, if you want to call them that. I think they call themselves that. Some people take exception to that word. The foundations are a step, a tool, a technique, a methodology, and they serve a lot of functions, as I mentioned. And Rene Wormser talks about that in his introduction. And that's the surprising thing, right? Is these free enterprise, gargantuan industrialists are kicking the ladder away so no one else can get up there to the dizzying heights of wealth and power that they've got. and they're creating a system which will just make it impossible for that to ever happen again. So it's quite surprising, but it's not really that surprising if you know a little bit about systems and how long they last and how far back these plans go, and a little bit of history makes these things not at all surprising. In fact, it makes them, as Alan Watt said, it makes things quite boring, because you know what's coming, right? Because you know where to look to read their plans, and you know you're never surprised by anything, because you realize that everything that comes out is a brick in the building that they are putting on top of the foundations. So continuing with a summary of Rene Worm's introduction, Worms had talked about how foundations are described as creating an unaccountable elite. He said, quote, tax-exempt funds established in perpetuity, an interlocking and self-perpetuating group, and mentioned that this group is unchecked by stockholders or the people or any firmly established canons of value. He compared this group to kind of governments, to people who run large religious institutions, church, the clergy and the priesthood, and also to businesses, saying that all these other institutions and structures have some accountability there, but the tax-exempt funds in these foundations do not. There's no accountability to anybody, really, and there should be, because they're tax-exempt. So they're supposed to exist for the benefit of the public, and that's why they get this special privilege of not having to pay tax, but it doesn't work like that. He said that the scope of this book was to look at the primary grant makers, so that's Ford, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and also the secondary distributors used in selecting ultimate recipients. And he named the Social Science Research Council, the Institute of Pacific Relations, and the American Council on Education. Interestingly, Worms has said that, let me just find the note here, the areas in which most harm could be done included education, international affairs, and social sciences. And so this book's looking at these areas and the influence that the foundations and their grant making and their doling out of massive amounts of wealth has had in those areas. Wormser gave us a warning. He said, it's possible that in 50 or 100 years, a great part of American, I say us, not like I'm an American, I'm not, but he gave a warning. It's possible that in 50 or 100 years, so by the mid-21st century, a great part of American industry will be controlled by trusts and foundations. He said, we will in this manner reach some form of society similar to socialism without consciously intending it. So again, that's linking us into the Fabian Socialists, the work of Rose Martin, and the book Fabian Freeway. And also, we talked a little bit about that in the interview with Patrick and Courtney, which is on the channel. That's Hayes Interviews, episode 2. We did about an hour and a half. And we found some links there as well with the Fabian Socialists. So these groups overlap, they tie in, and this history is kind of continuous. It's what I like to call continuity of control. What he did mention as well is that the foundations should be thought of as public trusts, because the tax exemption status shifts that tax burden onto the public, because the shortfall then has to be made up somewhere. And of course, it's the workers who get it, right? They're the ones who get ripped off and shafted and pay more and more and more and more every single year. So in chapter 1, he went on to tell us about the Cox Committee, which was created to investigate the foundation's the possibility that they were using resources for un-American and subversive activities. He said the Reese Committee, so the one that he was part of that came later, was to study the political purposes, propaganda, or attempts to influence legislation. So it's kind of more a soft power type of thing that he's looking at. He then was using examples of the previous committees and commissions that were carried out, such as the Cox Committee, and was talking about historical examples where the contributions of these foundations came with conditions. They were conditional, and of course they are. You don't dole out money and then just say, do what you want with it. Nobody does that. Nobody with money does that. The only reason anybody or any group with money doles out money, gives money away, is because they expect some kind of return on that money, right? I don't think there is really any philanthropy or charity on a big scale. There might be on a small scale, individuals chuck in a few quid in the collection box at the supermarket, or setting up some sort of regular payment to a charity. But even then, the return you're getting is that you feel good about your contribution to making things better. I gave my £5 to the charity every year, and therefore I can feel good because I'm doing my bit. So even there, you have this return on your money going out. Okay, so it's very hard to find examples of money going out that is just purely philanthropic and beneficial. Now, some people will give charity and with a pure heart, I'm sure, but not far too few, and certainly not these gigantic organizations. When Fords, Rockefellers, Carnegies, who are industrialists who have worked so long and so diligently to build up all this wealth, they've brutally cut down opposition and competition and trodden on smaller businesses and just been ruthless to get to that size, and then suddenly they just become all caring and generous and kind and concerned about the little people, right? I mean, if you believe that, I got a bridge to sell you. It's that kind of thing. So Wormser went on to give us an example of a Textron investigation, which was from the 1940s. But he said that in this study, his focus would be on the cultural and intellectual aspects, the field of ideas. And I said that would be better off thought of as the battlefield of ideas, because that's really where the war is, where the war happens. It's in our hearts and our minds, but it's in the intangible realm of language and ideas and beliefs and presuppositions and logic, or lack thereof, and narratives, stories. This is really where the real war is going on. And yes, there are people getting murdered and massacred, and there are hot wars and conflicts and things like that going on all over the world. But hearts and minds is where it's really at, because hearts and minds, beliefs, lead to behaviors and actions in the real world, right? So if you need to get a big group of order-following dogs' bodies to go out and pillage and plunder, then you got to make sure you program them with the correct beliefs and narratives and worldviews and presuppositions first, so that when they go out and do all that heinous stuff, which they're just criminals. They're just hired criminals and thugs. When they go out and do all that stuff, they'll do it. For one, they'll actually carry out your orders, and two, they won't feel too bad about it because they think they're the good guys, and the people they're doing it to are the bad guys. Wormser went on to give us some historical analogies, saying that organized charity can become an instrument of power, and he used the phrase. This also included thought control. And he listed some historical examples of confiscations and suppressions of wealthy religious orders, such as the Byzantine monasteries, the Knights Templar, church land under Henry VIII, the Jesuits. And he said that these charitable organizations gained so much power and economic clout that they had been shut down rather unceremoniously in the past. So this is not a new thing. Foundations, as I say many times, they just rebrand these things. They just give it a new name, give it a new title, say it's a new thing, but it's the same con. It's the same scam over and over and over again through the ages. It's chronology, to use an excellent Alan Watt neologism. So then he went on to talk about an author called W.H. White Jr., who wrote a book called The Organization Man. I showed it to you on a couple of weeks back. I'll see if I can find it and show it to you again. This was a bestseller when it came out, The Organization Man, William H. White Jr. It was a study of the way that working in large organizations affected individuals. And, you could probably guess what the conclusion was. The individuals get conditioned and they lose their individuality and they lose their ability to think clearly and to use their innate genius, right? Because they just become mouthpieces for the organization and they just absorb the culture, the corporate culture. And then they just regurgitate that back out. And they perfect the art of speaking a lot without saying anything. This is what you find all the time in large organizations and the corporate culture when they have these meetings and give these announcements and they use all this kind of language, which sounds good, but is just they're just saying it because it sounds good, and that's the way the people above them talk. So that's a book I'd like to read on the stream some point. It would be a good one to get into. From what I remember, it wasn't expensive. And I'm sure there are other copies out there. It wasn't a controversial book, certainly not a conspiracy book. Just an account of how life is in the rat race. So William H. White Jr. Argued that big organization techniques promote conformism and threaten genius, individual responsibility, and initiative. And he said that a foundation is a big organization, so it has the same effect. And what he noted that the foundations prefer is to fund teams of researchers. So there's no individuals getting funded. There's no out of the box renegade thinkers, right? That one person who has that unique view on things, that has that ability to synthesize information and create in a way that is outside the box, that is novel, right? You rarely get a group of people working on some novel ideas because groups of people tend to keep each other down at a certain level, the lowest common denominator, and that's what he said. Wormser also talked about Kurt Richter, who described grant applications ballooning to 6 to 8 single-spaced, typewritten pages, and that decisions on the grant applications would be passed around from committee to committee, and that this committee review would push the research toward the lowest intellectual common denominator. So when you try and please everybody, this is what you got to do. You have to dumb it down and dumb it down and dumb it down. Make it palatable, make it politically correct, make it appeal to the broadest range of people. That will mean, just think of the most popular things that exist. The most popular, it's like sports, soap operas, very basic, silly, straightforward films. The hard things, the things that are intellectually challenging, the things that are more intricate or complicated or nuanced, they're not popular because they're difficult, right? Easy is popular and popularity is bullshit. So, but this is what happens. The more people you get involved, the more cooks there are involved in creating the soup, the crappier your soup's going to be. Worms had talked about projects getting to a point where the only reason for the project is to justify more money, more grant money. So this is like, as I mentioned, the budgets of organizations, and any sort of public money gets given out. You get the budget, you spend everything on the budget. And if you can't spend anything in the budget, then you get your budget cut. So you always spend everything in your budget and say, we ran out of money, we need more money next year. Again, it's not a bug of the system, that's a feature of it. Wormser concluded that foundations exert enormous impact on education, social thinking, and ultimately on political action, with accountability falling on managers. And he said that law can only set negative checks and balances. So there's an argument here about the power concentration, whereby the boards of these foundations would self-perpetuate with endowments and intermediaries and growing that bureaucracy and that bureaucratic machine, which created what Wormser said would be a durable interlocking influence outside democratic checks, because you don't get to vote for the people sitting on the foundation boards, right? And then there was a causal chain as well, which was about how foundation funding shapes institutions, which shapes ideas, which shapes politics. So there's that flow, right? If you fund what research gets done, then it's going to have an impact on what is taught in the schools and the universities. So that's the education. And then the education, of course, well, you can see it now, right? How most students who come out of university are left-leaning, far left-leaning, center-left, right? Nobody goes to university and then comes out conservative or traditionalist, right? It goes the other way almost invariably every single time. Massive problem in America, for example. It's been going on for quite a while. It's been talked about ad nauseum by a variety of talking heads. And that's about it, really. So the kind of key quotes as well from that introductory is that the chief motivation of foundations has long ceased to be pure philanthropy. Also, that the quote that I read earlier, the existence of these foundations suggests the possibility of reaching some form of society similar to socialism without consciously intending it. So that aligns perfectly with the Fabian socialist way of changing things from within, of penetrating, of permeating, and of just doing this gradualism, a little tweak here, a little tweak there, get elected, work your way up to positions of power, and then start changing policy and making suggestions from within over that long term. So you end up with socialism, even though you didn't intend it and you weren't aware of it. Suddenly you find yourself in a socialist system. And then thirdly, as a final quote from this section, is the idea of an elite. But as Celine Lyon says, parasites is a better way to describe them. Operating outside of our democratic processes to shape the future in the image of its own value concept. So again, reminding us of the quote on the Fabian window, which is remold it nearer the heart's desire, remold the world nearer the heart's desire. And I'll remind people that quote is also found in the beginning of the book, First Global Revolution by the Club of Rome, in which it is announced that humans are the enemy. So it all ties in, it all links in very nicely indeed. So good evening to everybody tuning in. I hope you are feeling good. I hope you're feeling better than I am, a little healthier than me, at least. And I hope things are going well. I hope you haven't missed me too much. We've got Tammy, Turbs, Blake, and Celine Lyon over on YouTube. Cloudburst was here earlier asking me about a podcast. I do have a Haze Reviews podcast. Timmy's here as well. Good evening. But I'm not uploading newer stuff to it. I'm actually just in the process of uploading the Fabian Freeway readings at the minute. But I should probably just start dumping the audio from these live streams in there as well. Then people can get it and download it and listen to it, because it's not the most visual show, I'll be honest. So there's no reason why I should have it only on video. It makes sense to get the audio out there too. So I might start doing that. Again, it's just time. Time is the limitation that I have on working on these things and making them good and slick and enjoyable. Time is the problem. But it's good to have you here. We're going to continue with, we're still in chapter 1, in fact. So we're going to be continuing chapter 1 tonight. The section coming up is Foundation Responsibility. And we'll just sort of carry on and see how far we get. If at any point you would like to support the show, please check out allmylinks.com/Haze Reviews. It's right there. And you'll find all my links to do all the different things that you might want to do. Continuity of Control. That is the free email series, which will educate you on some of the craziest quotes from the last 100 years, beginning with H.G. Wells all the way up to David Rockefeller. And then nick@hagereviews.com is my email address. If you want to get in touch, ask me a question, send me a resource or a book recommendation or complaint, then please do get in touch. I like hearing from people and talking to people. So it's allmylinks.com/hagereviews if at any point you do want to support. I appreciate it. So that is it for our little introductory spiel. So we'll get into the book and we'll do some reading and we'll see how far we get before my throat collapses and I can't speak anymore. This is Hayes Reviews, Truth in Books, and we're reading from Foundations by Rene. We're continuing with Chapter 1, which is entitled The Study of Foundations, and we are going to be reading the section entitled Foundation Responsibility. Let me get my pencil. There it is. So, let's go. In his statement to the Rees Committee in 1954, Mr. H. Rowan Gaither, then president of the Ford Foundation, estimated the annual contributions to philanthropy in the United States at $5.6 billion. Of this sum, he said, less than 3% came from foundations. There can be no doubt that foundations represent, financially, but a small part of the philanthropic world. According to figures published by the American Association of Fundraising Council Incorporated, annual charitable donations in 1956 had reached the astounding figure of $6.1 billion. Endowments and properties of privately supported religious, educational, health and welfare institutions had increased in 1956 by an estimated $1.4 billion and now exceeded $42 billion. Of this total, religious institutions owned about $12.2 billion, and about 53% of all donations were for religious purposes. Education consumed 9% of the total. Contributions to philanthropic and charitable foundations, something like 3%. The Association of Fundraising Council Incorporated estimates that out of about 40,000 organizations listed by the Internal Revenue Service as tax-exempt, the number of those engaged in giving is about 6,000. It estimates further that such foundations own assets running between $7 and $9.5 billion. Mr. Gaither was on weak ground, however, if he sought to prove the relative unimportance of foundations through financial comparison with other philanthropic media. Foundations occupy a unique place in our society for many reasons, of which two are peculiarly important for distinguishing them from other philanthropic bodies. One is that foundations are not subject to the normal forms of control by which other institutions are checked, such as responsibility to a constituency or membership, or to an academic body. The second is that, under the influence of the venture capital theory, so much foundation money has been channeled in favor of social change. Only a minority of foundations has fallen victim to the obsession for social change, but among this minority are to be found some of the wealthiest and some of the oldest endowments. They have adopted the concept that foundations should be clearinghouses for ideas. Clearinghouses for ideas. So we're back to the battlefield of ideas again. And they must accept responsibility for the results of their selected patronage. Such responsibility, as John D. Rockefeller Jr. put it at the hearings of the Walsh Commission, may result in legislative steps to protect the interests of the public. Foundations cannot deny their public responsibility. The Russell Sage Foundation, a leader in the foundation world, specializing in philanthropic research, has repeatedly insisted upon public accounting of foundation finances and activities. Mr. Dean Rusk, president of the Rockefeller Foundation and of the General Education Board, said in his statement to the Rees Committee, "We are convinced that tax-exempt organizations should make regular public reports about their funds and activities. Many, though not all, of the large foundations have for years issued public reports, thus implicitly recognizing their responsibility to the public. Large foundations can do more harm as well as more good than smaller foundations. But even comparatively small foundations can have an impact on society disproportionate to their monetary size, particularly when promoting a seductive idea promising better things for society. When they are ready to tamper with the public welfare by pursuing particular brands of social philosophy advocated by their managers, the dynamics of their use can give these smaller foundations an importance far beyond their arithmetical magnitude. Mr. F. Emerson Andrews, in his Philanthropic Foundations, writing of the venture capital concept, has this to say, quote, "Because of their relative freedom from governmental and other controls, it has been suggested that foundations may have a special mandate to enter fields of controversy, where the explosive nature of the issues would make suspect the findings of less independent organizations, and where the needed financing from any other source may prove difficult." Following this interpretation of the venture capital concept, the work of even comparatively small foundations can obviously have enormous impact on our society. A few examples will illustrate. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, a substantial foundation, but a dwarf compared with the giants like Ford, Rockefeller, and the Carnegie Corporation, has achieved stupendous importance and power. By 1953, its net assets, despite heavy disbursements, had about doubled to $20 million. Spending annually between $500,000 and $600,000, the endowment achieved a key position in the areas of foreign relations and international organizations. So I'm reminded of, at this point, a really excellent channel that I've been enjoying a lot recently, which is called The History of Propaganda. So if you look that up on YouTube, he had 888 subscribers exactly earlier today. But it's a small channel in terms of subscribers, but the research and the presentations on there is fantastic. It is really good stuff. There's resource it's all sourced, it's all referenced, it's quotes from books and pictures and old documents and everything. Dwayne, I think, is the host. It's a fantastic channel. I really recommend it. I would love to see his audience grow and for more people to go and learn there, because it complements what we do on this channel massively. It's really good. And he was talking about in a recent episode that he put up, which was about the UN, the Long Road to the United Nations, I think it was called. Should we get it up quickly? Shall we get it up quickly? Oh, I have it open right here. There you go. I already had a tab ready to go. Boom. So the channel is The History of Propaganda. You can see down here. And there's this talk, the Long Road to the United Nations. Whoops. And you can see he's showing you books, this book, and then he shows you pictures of people involved in the Paris 1919 conference. And he's going through all these people, who they are, key players here. More books, more lists of attendees, more documents and artifacts. It's really awesome stuff. I really like what he's putting together. I think his presentations are fantastic. And he has such a small audience, which is criminal. But it just goes to show that these big channels that get the big audiences and draw in all the eyeballs and the clicks, I think most of the time they're artificially inflated. Whereas the real work, the really good work, the really hard work, the diligent, close reading, wide reading, and presentation goes on much, much, much smaller channels that are niche, harder to find. But this is one of them. I really recommend people go there, help support and learn. But he was talking about, specifically in this video, he was talking about the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and what a massive impact it had in developing internationalism and bringing internationalism to America, developing it as a concept, and bringing more internationalism into the systems and the economies. And of course, we're now in a state where, everything is just so interconnected. Everything is so interconnected that we We need to build this one world system, this one world government, to make sure it all works okay and to make sure nobody's ripping anybody off and to make it fair and equitable and just for everybody, right? Please go over and support this guy and check out his work. You will enjoy it massively. If you like what I do, you will probably enjoy his stuff even more, to be honest, because yeah, he's doing fantastic stuff and it's awesome. So yeah, Carnegie for International Peace was a key organization in bringing internationalism to us. Let's just say to us. Internationalism, of course, just being a sort of prerequisite to rolling out the one world system of top-down technocratic control. So, that's what Wormser is telling us here. This dwarf organization of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace has a massive influence in foreign relations, Council on Foreign Relations, anybody, and international organizations. So that's your UN, etc. Continuing. Its influence, increasing over the past 47 years, has reached into the Department of State, into law schools where international law is taught, into the foreign offices of other nations, and into the United Nations and its associated organizations. There you go. Through concentrated efforts in publishing, in the organization and management of conferences, and in cooperation with various other groups, some subsidized, it has reached a position of worldwide influence. There you go. And I should mention as well, in that video that we just talked about, that I just flashed up on the screen there, he does talk about the origins of the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations, which goes back to this the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 and all the people who were there, including Colonel House and many, many others. And what I like about his work is that he's introducing me to names that I wasn't familiar with and books I wasn't familiar with. So I actually bought a book today based on that video and what he was talking about in there. So it's a great resource. But yeah, worldwide influence of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Continuing, it is no longer a mere clearinghouse for ideas. It has become a proponent of the particular ideas of its trustees, its staff, and an entourage sympathetic to certain special concepts of international relations promoted by the foundation itself. The strategic use of its relative, because the thing is, like, these organizations and foundations, right, they're supposed to exist for the public good, for the benefit of the public. Well, who in the public wants internationalism? Who in the public wants all this cheap shit made in China and no jobs here at home? Who in the public wants to live in a service economy, a post-industrial economy which is aiming for zero growth? Who in the public wants a massive influx of non-native people that never ends and the radical, permanent transformation of their communities? Nobody's voting for that. Nobody wants it. It has to be brought in and brought about surreptitiously. And that links again to the Fabian socialist way of doing things. So it's a real con to say that these organizations, these foundations are there for the public's benefit. Here you go. This is it. It's not about the public anymore. It's about the ideas of its trustees. You don't give money away without expecting some kind of return. So, the strategic use of its relatively small funds has resulted in the mobilization of additional funds being causes favored by the endowment in the form of matched grants supplied by other foundations within its sphere of influence. Large funds have also come from membership contributions to organizations supported by the endowment and in some instances created or fathered by it. Some smaller foundations, like the Hillman Foundation, have found their influence greatly amplified through the grantings of annual awards. 5 were recently announced of $500 each. These small awards received considerable newspaper publicity. They were granted, the newspapers reported, for outstanding work in journalism, magazines, and books in 1956. The outstanding works selected, however, were all political. Consistent with the policy of the Hillman Foundation, they concerned political goals of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America, of which the late Mr. Hillman, as a tribute to whom the foundation had been created, had been president. In addition to an award to the New York Times for its editorial treatment of the Near East crisis, a reporter of the Des Moines Tribune received one for articles on segregation. An editor of Harper's, one for an editorial attacking censorship efforts of private organizations. Robert Penn Warren, one for an article in Life on segregation. And Professor Walter Gellhorn of Columbia, one for his book on individual freedom and government restraints. Other foundations have offered public prizes, and in this way multiplied their public visibility and increased immeasurably their opportunities for propaganda. The Nobel Prize, as well as the Stalin Prize. I've never heard of the Stalin Prize before. That's definitely one to look up. Illustrate this method of publicity-producing giving. Though the purpose of the Nobel Prize is essentially apolitical, while the Stalin Prize, or whatever has taken its place since Stalin's loss of standing in Russia, is merely a political propaganda gesture, both evidence the publicity impact which a relatively small amount of money can have if used strategically. An example of the sometimes explosive nature of foundation giving is the support by foundations of the late Dr. Kinsey in what he called sex research. There's a footnote. The substance of his activity will be discussed in Chapter 4 as an important case, illustrating the attempt by foundations to evade responsibility for the results of their grants. I'll mention as well that the book by Raymond Fosdick entitled The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation, which we read in full on the channel, does include the admission that the Rockefeller Foundation were funding Alfred Kinsey, right? So that's backed up by the president of the Rockefeller's own account of what that foundation was up to. The Rockefeller Foundation supported the National Research Council's Committee for Research in Problems of Sex with a total of $1.755 million from 1931 to 1954. Of this sum, the activities conducted by Dr. Kinsey received some $414,000 from 1941 to 1949, as reported by the Rockefeller Foundation to the Reese Committee. So just while we're there on the subject of Kinsey, let me grab a couple of books. So, if anyone's unfamiliar with Kinsey, shady, dodgy, nasty character. He's been, a film's been made about him. I think it's Liam Neeson that plays him. So, and I'm sure that's not going to go into the crimes and consequences of this man's life, right? But this book's by Judith Reisman, PhD. And it's called Kinsey, the Red Queen, and the Grand Scheme. Let's just read this front cover blurb here. In 1948, the Institute for Sex Research at Indiana University was led by eugenicist Alfred C. Kinsey, whose sex research shook America's moral foundations and launched the 1960s sexual revolution. 50 years later, new revelations confirmed Dr. Judith Reisman's 1981 expose of scientific fraud and criminally derived data contained in the publicly funded Kinsey reports. Dr. Reisman revealed that Kinsey conducted human experiments in a soundproof laboratory built to his specifications at Indiana University, and that the sexual abuse of at least 317 infants and young boys was a scientific protocol for Kinsey's 1948 report. Dr. Reisman discloses for the first time the ongoing consequences to the American people and the world based on Kinsey's deliberately skewed research. Kinsey died in 1956, but his institute endures today under the expanded title of the Kinsey Institute for Research in Sex, Gender, and Reproduction, suggesting an even more ominous threat to human rights and liberty. So if we go here, what we could just do quickly, this is a 1998 book. We could just quickly have a look at the back, check out the index, and see if Rockefeller shows up here. So we can just kind of cross-reference and double-check. So this is R. And we've got, that section on rape there, that looks like about 20 different references for rape throughout the book. But Rockefeller Foundation, if we go down here, is this whole section here. Boom. That looks about 30 reference page numbers, right? So it lines up. And then the Reese Committee is even mentioned up here as well, which is what we're reading about at the moment. The sexual revolution was based on a lie. Judith Reisman has spent 30 years uncovering the truth. So that's one by Judith Reisman. Nice little paperback. Then the other one by the same author is this one, Sexual Sabotage. How one mad scientist unleashed a plague of corruption and contagion on America. And this one is more about Kinsey. Judith Reisman, the preeminent Kinsey whistleblower, returns to tell the story of how the K-bomb was launched from a Gothic limestone Indiana University building, its time-released detonation set to silently emit erototoxic radioactivity into our atmosphere unto the generations. Kinsey and his Indiana cohorts sabotaged our nation by entering our libraries and schools as sex educators, ridiculing marriage, fidelity, and chastity. They preached widespread sexual experimentation, succeeded in nationwide fraud campaigns, and gutted the tough laws that kept pornography and predators at bay. So, key part of the puzzle, the timeline and the history and understanding where we are today, which is, most children who have access to the internet have unlimited access to hardcore pornography, and that's just taken as progress. So, little side tangent there, unplanned, but important. It's a good example of that you can bring up and mention to people if, foundations, so what? Who cares? Maybe you're trying to alert people to the influence of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example, or one of the foundations run, I don't know, there's hundreds of thousands of these organizations out there, right? But that's a uncontested piece of history that you can bring up and point to if you're ever having these kinds of conversations with people about why foundations are important, why we should be looking at them, and maybe not just taking everything they say so seriously, and not assuming that they are philanthropic and that they care about the public, right? So continuing here, he got $414,000 for his research by the Rockefellers. This amount is microscopic compared with the total of $6 billion annually spent on philanthropy in the United States. But the impact of this comparatively small sum on one subject was quite out of proportion to the relative size of the two figures. One may approve or disapprove of Dr. Kinsey's efforts and judge variously their impact upon our sex mores, but the Kinsey incident does show that the comparatively small donations may have big repercussions in the realm of ideas. So I think from their point of view, that's what you would call a good investment, right? This massive transformation, the knock-on effect still being felt today in 2026, just for a mere $414,000. That's bang for your buck right there. So the next section we're moving on to is called What is Propaganda and What is Education? What control the federal government may exercise over foundations is based almost entirely on the tax law. The state under whose laws a foundation is organized might penalize it in various ways or even dissolve it for misconduct. All that the federal government can do, however, is to withdraw its tax exemption and the corresponding tax benefits to donors. What then are the bases for such punishment? The tax law is woefully weak. And if you remember as well at the start of the book, Rene Wormser is a tax expert with many, many decades of experience in this. So he's a man. He's the man to talk about this. The tax law is woefully weak. The controlling statute is worded quite generally and loosely. The courts have been inclined to interpret these loose provisions in favour of the foundations. And in any event, the Internal Revenue Service is not equipped or manned to do the policing necessary to determine when the law has been violated. It's interesting that the courts are inclined to interpret in favour of the foundations, right? The most important limitation in the law is the one which prohibits political activity. This prohibition is now covered principally by Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1954, formerly paragraph 6 of Section 101, in this way. A foundation may qualify for tax exemption, quote, no substantial part of the activities of which is carrying on propaganda or otherwise attempting to influence legislation, and which does not participate in or intervene in, including the publishing or distribution of statements, any political campaign on behalf of any candidate for public office. This test, quantitatively, is weak. What is a substantial part of its activities? Dollars? Numbers of grants? Impact? It's also weak qualitatively. Is legislation influenced only if a foundation directly supports the passage or the defeat of a particular piece of legislation? Or does a foundation also influence legislation by promoting a political theory, which indirectly results in a change of law, or is intended to? The term propaganda is not defined in the statute. Certainly there could have been no intention to prohibit all propaganda, as that would have constituted an attack on the churches, which are entitled to engage in religious propaganda. Political propaganda was intended, certainly, but the phrase "to influence legislation" can be interpreted to be attributive to propaganda, and thus to limit it. The wording of the statute created many ambiguities. It is sometimes extremely difficult to draw the line, for example, between those forms of education which are essential or desirable in our democratic society, and those which have as their ends the promotion of political value concepts in the realm of ideas. Numerous foundations pursue their political ways free of interference by the Internal Revenue Service because of the ambiguity and weakness of the statute referred to. For example, the Robert Schalkenbach Foundation of New York, a small foundation with an intensive publishing and training program, is dedicated to the promotion of Henry George's single tax idea. This endowment spends its money to persuade the public that real estate taxes can and should replace all other forms of taxation. It probably abstains from lobbying and from any direct interference with the legislative process, but it has probably indoctrinated thousands of more or less intelligent citizens. What it does must in the end amount to propaganda to influence legislation. Yet the foundation would undoubtedly claim its efforts to be, quote, educational. A foundation has, for years, supported the World Calendar Association and the efforts of Miss Elizabeth Akelis to introduce worldwide a new method of computing the calendar year. Her efforts may be meritorious, but this seemingly apolitical activity does have legislative aspects. How can a new calendar be adopted without legislative action? Supported by a foundation for world government endowed with $1 million by Mrs. Anita McCormick Blaine, a tax-exempt committee to frame a world constitution under Chancellor Robert Hutchins of the University of Chicago wrote a program for a world republic in 1948. The foundation was to finance a public educational campaign in the principles of world government. The proposed constitution advocated, among other things, a national surrender to a world government of expropriation rights, control of plans for the improvement of the world's physical facilities, the power of taxation, regulation of transportation, and similar prerogatives of national governments. Dr. Hutchins, now president of the Ford Foundation's offshoot, the Fund for the Republic, stated in 1948 and may well have believed that, quote, world government is necessary, therefore it is or must be made possible. But the expression of such a belief was hardly apolitical, and the support by a tax-exempt foundation of the program which Dr. Hutchins supported was hardly the support of education. So another quite revealing and important paragraph there. Some of these foundations are overtly advocating world government. The American Labor Education Service Incorporated is a tax-exempt organization. Among its purposes, it lists, quote, to cooperate with the labor movement in intensifying education in the field of international affairs, and to encourage the study of such issues within the group and unions. It becomes apparent, however, from an examination of this organization's literature, that the education referred to is essentially propaganda for the political labor movement. In announcements of ALES activities are to be found these educational topics. Quote, how can workers' education advance labor's economic and political objectives? Political action for labor and political action techniques. In a newsletter discussing the Taft-Hartley bill, the ALES said, quote, the passage of the Taft-Hartley bill indicates, among other things, the need for an intensive push in labor education. The American Labor Education Service is equipped to furnish this push. There's a triple asterisk footnote here, which I think just takes us down to the single. No, I'm not sure where the triple asterisk footnotes are written. Could be at the back of the book somewhere. I don't know. It might mean something that I'm unaware of. So, continuing. Other examples of the political nature of this foundation's work will be found in Chapter 6 and in the staff report on the ALES to the Reese Committee. This foundation received financial support from the Rockefeller Foundation. Perhaps the presence of the word education in the name of the American Labor Education Service was sufficient to prove that its work was purely educational. Another strange educational tax-exempt organization is the League for Industrial Democracy. We have heard about that before in the book Fabian Freeway. Formerly the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. I'm glad they put its former label in here. Again, rebranding, right? It was called the Intercollegiate Socialist Society up until the USSR was getting a bad reputation for all the death. And so they rebranded themselves, called themselves the League for Industrial Democracy. So socialism and the socialists transformed themselves into Democrats and industrial democracy advocates. In a booklet entitled, significantly, Revolt, it describes its work as follows. The League for Industrial Democracy is a militant educational movement, which challenges those who would think and act for a new social order based on production for use, not for profit. That is a revolutionary slogan. It means that members of the LID think and work for the elimination of capitalism and the substitution for it of a new order in whose building the purposeful and passionate thinking of the student and worker today will play an important part. That's an excellent quote. It's the new order. And what we learned about in Fabian Freeway as well is that capitalism and socialism was always going to be international. It has internationalism baked into it, according to Elizabeth Tamedley, who wrote this book, Socialism and the International Economic Order. And of course, if we get the book Fabian Freeway itself, which is currently being uploaded as a podcast under Hayes Reviews. If you search Hayes Reviews wherever you like to get your podcasts, you can, I've put 6 episodes up so far. It doesn't include any of my preamble rambles. It's just the reading of the book and whatever comments I happen to make during the reading. But yeah, if we go back here and we have a look 4. Let's see if we can find League. It's not here, the League for Industrial Democracy. Oh, that's because we're looking at the index of persons, and it's not a person, is it? It's a group. Here, LID. So the League for Industrial Democracy, you can see, actually has a lot of the book is about that. There's a lot in here about the League for Industrial Democracy. So that's probably about 20 page numbers there, 20 references. Fantastic book. I really strongly, wholeheartedly endorse and recommend this book. It's good. But internationalism was always baked into communism, and communism was always baked into socialism. So this is pretty good. I like these connections that we're making here. So continuing with the text, the LID has only a modest budget of $50,000 a year. Some of it supplied by foundations, but its influence has been wide and deep. Again, they're getting a good return on their money for the LID. It is understandable that the Bureau of Internal Revenue contested the tax-exempt status of the LID. However, the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in 1931 upheld its tax exemption by applying the broadest possible interpretation of the term education against the contention of the Collector of Internal Revenue that the organization was political. What? So, this group published a booklet called Revolt, where they said that it's a revolutionary slogan to make a new social order, to eliminate capitalism, and that's just educational. It's just educational. It's not political. Come on. It's showing you how these courts are totally also corrupt, right? I mean, the people running the courts and making the decisions in the courts probably belong to the same fraternities and secret societies and think tanks and institutes as the people sitting on the boards of the foundations, I think. Okie doke. In a lengthy letter submitted to the Rees Committee, Dr. Laidler of the LID insisted upon a similarity between the work of the LID and some college courses in the social sciences. He said that books and pamphlets published by the LID were in fact used in some college courses. Using this as a major premise, and the fact that colleges are educational as a minor premise, he produces a syllogism with the conclusion that the work of the LID is also educational. Yeah, so the syllogism is something like colleges use materials published by LID. Colleges are educational. Therefore, LID is educational. That's the structure of a syllogism, right? Statement 1, statement 2, therefore, statement 3. But it's a really tricky, sneaky way of getting people to think you just said something logical. But actually, there's often no connection between any of those things. So that's a syllogism. Back to the text. Semantic difficulties in interpreting statutes are not unusual in our system of law, or in any other. Admittedly, our courts have a problem in trying to draw the line between education in its acceptable sense and, quote, education, which is political propaganda intended to influence legislation. They are inclined to interpret punitive statutes liberally in favor of the litigant strictly against the government. This should probably be so. But decisions such as that in the LID case exhibit a generosity of interpretation so extreme as to make the punitive statute virtually worthless insofar as it proscribes propaganda activities by foundations directed toward influencing legislation. If tax exemption is available to the LID, which educates to socialist ends, there is no reason why it should not be available to organizations which educate to other partisan and political ends, such as segregation, other forms of racial and religious discrimination, polygamy, nudism, and fascism. If the law is sufficiently ambiguous to permit political propaganda under the guise of education, this ambiguity does not, however, justify foundation managers in supporting such activities. An interpretation of the venture capital theory permitting the use of tax-exempt funds. See, sorry, just to dwell on that last point that he's making there. This is how you can identify some of this real illogical nonsense that gets put out there. Rules for thee and not for me, right? We like free speech unless it's about ... You know, and there's a whole switcheroony going on in the States at the moment where you've got the team that used to call for one thing, it's now been reversed, and they're shouting that against that thing, and the other team that didn't want it are now calling for it, right? And this is the dialectic. They do it every time. The red team, blue team, switcheroony, confusing, playing people off against each other, and walking you into these self-defeating, self-refuting positions and opinions and arguments. And this is because, for the most part, people have a complete lack of training in logic. They don't know how to craft an argument, how to marshal evidence, how to use the grammar of a situation and then apply some logic and produce rhetoric. It's all just emotional outpourings of incoherent accounts of subjective perspectives and feelings for the most part, and, you know, shouting and screaming and crying and talking over each other. Gone are the days of formal debate, of listening and hearing your opponent's points of view and refuting their points one by one with your own arguments and evidence and logic, right? People don't know how to do that anymore. I often think Jay Dyer should teach a course on that, because this is what he does on his live streams all the time with people. And that would be a useful skill to put in the hands of people who care about these kinds of issues. It would be a useful show to have online, where you would get people on different sides of an issue to come together and have a respectful, logical debate with rules that is formally managed and mediated to show you how it's done. But instead, you know, that doesn't sell. It doesn't get clicks. It doesn't get eyeballs on it, because people want to see the drama. They want to see the tears, the anger. They want to see the frustration. They want to see the rage bait and the table flip and the walking out. You know, that's what they want to see. They want to see the Jerry Springer type stuff, because it's more entertaining. And as Jerry Mander taught us in his excellent book, 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television, which looks like this. All that stuff that I just described communicates via the medium of screens much better than its opposite. So what that means is that anger, fear, rage, sadness, frustration, annoyance, all these things communicate much more effectively by way of images on a screen than cooperation, friendliness, patience, respect, calmness, kindness, generosity, right? These things don't communicate very well. They don't make for good TV. They don't make good TV. You don't want to watch people being respectful and kind and courteous and thoughtful and patient with each other. It's boring. You want to see people fight and go through stress and challenge and grief and anger and all that other stuff, because it just communicates better. So it's part of the medium of the screen that cannot be reformed. That's what he talks about in this book. He doesn't have, it's not 4 arguments for the reformation of television. It's not 4 arguments for the improvement of television. He's like, the only option we have is to eliminate, get rid of it. It cannot be changed, because, and he argues in the book, Marshall McLuhan did not go far enough when he said the medium is the message. He says that in quite early in the book. He's like, McLuhan was right, but he didn't go far enough. He's like, it cannot be reformed. It needs to be gotten rid of because of the damage, because of the way it affects our minds, because of the harm that it does, the way it hijacks our conscious awareness and our logical, critical faculties when we're watching it. Get rid of it. So if you haven't thrown your television out yet, this is your sign from the universe to chuck your TV out on the street. Someone will take it, or even better, smash it up with a baseball bat. You probably get a lot of joy out of doing something like that. But you'll have a whole mess to clean up afterwards, so you're probably best off just leaving it on the street and letting somebody take it. So there you are. Little rant, little tangent. And I don't even know whereabouts we were. I think we were still on this page, weren't we? Oh yeah, we're talking about syllogism. So we're here. Semantic difficulties in interpreting statutes are not unusual in our system of law or in any other. Admittedly, our courts have a problem in trying to draw the line between education. Oh no, hang on, we did that bit already too, didn't we? So we'll go from here. An interpretation of the venture capital theory permitting the use of tax-exempt funds for partisan purposes would be a palpable absurdity. It is a difficult matter with organizations created to pursue partisan ends and using the dues of members for this purpose. The managers of tax-exempt endowments act as trustees not only for the donors to such foundations but also for the public. They have as little right to use their trust funds for partisan ends as they have to put them in their own pockets. Not all tax-exempt foundations have received as generous treatment from the courts as did the League for Industrial Democracy. The 20th Century Fund lost its tax exemption for the years 1935 to 1939 because of its advocacy of enabling laws on credit union extension. In 1925, the World Peace Foundation lost its tax-exempt status because it acted as a distributor of League of Nations literature, then considered partisan propaganda. It regained its exemption in 1928 because by that time its activities were no longer deemed an attempt to influence legislation. Recently, the exemption of the Institute of Pacific Relations was revoked for reasons which shall be discussed later. There have been other cases of exemption denial. Looking at them together, one is impressed with their lack of consistency, and there is no wonder. Each case depends upon the semantic interpretation of the controlling statute which appeals to the court before which it is heard. So there you are, it's a case-by-case basis. And I think you probably would find that it's not so arbitrary and willy-nilly in that it's to do with who's shaking hands and what deals are being made and agreements and donations and in the Masonic lodges or in the secret society meetups or down the golf club or wherever it is that these people get together. That's where these decisions are made, not in the court. So the next section is, what is religious? The courts are faced with another semantic difficulty when obliged to determine which organizations are entitled to tax exemption because their activities are truly within the scope of the term religious and which ones cross the line and serve political ends. In the course of their legitimate religious activities, churches and religious bodies often develop ancillary programs which are not religious in the strict sense of the word. In our complex society, religious groups frequently become involved in legislative problems. They fight for school buses to religious schools, for public support of such schools, for temperance, for Sunday observance. They participate actively in public discussions regarding the divorce laws, birth control, religious instruction in the public schools, etc. There are in existence many para-religious organizations whose only relationship to religion is that their membership comes from only one confession. Such organizations claim tax exemption, though principally devoted to the advancement of political group interests in legislation. Some of them maintain registered lobbyists in Washington. They are dedicated to such diverse causes as the political and financial support of the State of Israel, the fight against segregation, the liberalization of the immigration laws for the benefit of their co-religionists, and opposition to the political aims of certain other religious groups. There can be little doubt that some of these militant organizations, spending their tax-exempt funds openly to influence legislation, should be deprived of their tax advantage. But there is little promise of this happening. Both the legislature and the courts are understandably reluctant to take any steps which, rightly or wrongly, might be called an interference with the freedom of religion. In addition, as far as the courts are concerned, the law is regrettably ambiguous as it stands. Interesting, we got a range of diverse causes here, such as supporting Israel, segregation, more immigration, liberalizing the immigration laws, basically just means more immigration, for the benefit of their co-religionists, and opposition to the political aims of other religious groups, okay? So, very tricky. Which religious group is involved in these sorts of things? So the next section is foundation responsibility in supporting social change. In statements filed with the Rees Committee, some foundation managers maintained that they were not responsible for the frequency with which grants have been applied to the advancement of social change toward anti-capitalism. They attributed the prevalence of New Deal sentiment in the literature and programs which they have supported to the political and intellectual climate of the times. If foundations have favoured quasi-socialist liberal causes and discriminated against conservative programs, it may well be due to some extent to the fact that the preference had already existed in the academic world. So the academic world was already liberal back then, and is still liberal today, pretty much. And any conservative who comes along gets labelled, racist, bigoted, etc. Also, there may have been a penetration of foundation boards and administrative ranks by anti-conservative professionals, academicians, scholars, and administrators, with a resulting adoption of their current idiosyncrasies by the endowments. So this penetration, this word that he's using here, I don't think is accidental, because of course, that is the Fabian Society's preferred method of change. Also repeated by Klaus Schwab when he talked about penetrating the cabinets of governments all over the world with his young global leaders. Before he stepped down from leading the World Economic Forum and handed it off to Larry Fink, was it? Some BlackRock bigwig. But yeah, that's exactly what's described in the Fabian Freeway, is the penetration of the academic world, because they target students, because the students are all goody-goody and they want to change the world, and you can rally them with promises of utopia and fairness and justice and social justice, right? So the students, you lobby the students change the academic world, and then the academic world influences the world of foundations and charity and this sort of thing. Because it's all about progress, right? It's all about forwards, changing things, making it fair, transforming things. And conservatism is the opposite. The fuddy-duddy people who like the ways of the past and the things that work, that are familiar, that are traditional. Get rid of that. We want progress, we want newness, we want change. And then here we are in 2026, enjoying the fruits of that progress. So continuing. This tendency was accelerated by the use of intermediary agencies and individual expert consultants, in inverted commas there. The judging of the merits of grant proposals was delegated to these agencies and consultants. Such delegation cannot, however, shift responsibility away from the foundation managers. Advisory experts were chosen for their standing in the academic world, but the structure of academic life does not differ from other structures in this sense. It encompasses a web of political forces. The politically minded manipulator often is rewarded with eminent status, whether he is a true scholar or not. I don't know why I said scholar there, a true scholar or not. The symbol of academic prestige is not necessarily an evidence of learning or of sound social judgment. Once an academician is selected to act as an expert, he becomes one in the public eye because he has been so chosen. That's a great point. What makes you an expert, really? 10,000 hours of study? Or is it because they put you on the news at 6 o'clock to talk about something? He may have succeeded in coming into office chiefly because he had developed good public relations. If that was the case, he is likely to support whatever fads and foibles enabled him to succeed, rather than the thought of truly creative minds. Fantastic. Very great point. So this is what experts do, right? It's kind of like how the foundations are seen, how the foundation money is seen as desirable and necessary, and so the projects that are suggested will be designed in such a way as to maximize the amount of money that they think they can draw down from the charities and the foundations. Like, you want it to have all these sub questions so that you can make it go on and on and on and on for a long time and keep getting funding for as long as possible. You don't want to just get one round of funding, solve the problem, and then now you got to think up a whole nother area of study, a whole new range of experiments and all this. You know, once you secure that line of funding, then you want to drag it out. You want to spend the full budget and then claim that you need more the following year. Like I said, it's a bit like that. It sort of becomes self-perpetuating, and people don't question the motivation to keep it going. They just keep doing it. Similar with experts, right? He can just become a self-proclaimed expert who reinforces the system which allowed him to proclaim himself an expert, so that he can perpetuate and keep going his reputation and his cushy series of speaking gigs and engagements and invitations to talk at conferences around the world and his lifestyle in general. You know, it's a very, very important point there on experts. So continuing, these experts have almost invariably followed the current fashion, which grew up among teachers and political scientists under a barrage of communist and socialist propaganda and under the impact made by the Depression of 1930. This fashion is one of confidence in the power of man to create heaven on earth by manipulating the structure of government. The belief in radical change is manifested by the statement of William C. Carr, Executive Secretary of the National Education Association of the United States, to the Reece Committee. According to the NEA, it is not the American ideal to be hostile to change. It attributes the greatness of America to the freedom of its citizens to propose and adopt modifications in the structure of the government and of their other institutions. I mean, I think it's pretty clear in your constitution over there, right? These things were already thought of and included in there and written in there. But no, we need to keep changing things and updating things and progress. The NEA believes it is the right and duty of good citizens to adapt their political and social institutions within the broad circumstances of our constitutional freedoms to meet new circumstances and conditions. Mr. Carr is quoted not to contest his point, but to bring out that the change which he supports is clearly political. It would seem apparent, therefore, that the advocacy of such change, having essential political implications, is not a proper field for a foundation whose tax exemption is granted by the grace of the entire public. Yet, some of the large foundations seem to have adopted an almost religious belief in change for change's sake. Now, strange that, isn't it? It's almost like they have a plan, a long-term plan, and they want to keep nudging and guiding and pushing and steering things towards the fulfillment and the accomplishment of that long-term plan. It's almost like that. Oh, they just really like change. They just like changing things all the time for the sake of change. Well, no, there's a pattern to the changes. There's a progression. That's why they call it progress, right? You can extrapolate out where things are headed by looking at what's been done. This is why looking at the past is so important. This is what Dwayne says on the History of Propaganda channel. You're going to look at the past so you can know the future, because it's a plan and it's going somewhere. It's not just chaotic and random and willy-nilly and accidental. But yes, this was almost like they have a religious belief in change for change's sake. Continue. Even in the absence of a conspiracy among foundations to promote change, the cumulative effect of this almost unison approach and the absence of any substantial support for contrary movements looking toward social stability seems to warrant questioning whether these foundations are truly performing their trust duty to the public. Even though they're not conspiring, we should still probably ask them about this thing that they're doing that looks an awful lot like a conspiracy. Trends come into being from time to time and may persist whether foundation supported or not. The real responsibility of foundations rests in their ability to provide war chests in the battle of ideas. However much foundation managers may talk about their right and duty to use their trust funds as venture capital, there can be little doubt that in their ventures they have given preference to the political ideas held by cliques of academicians, and to the proponents of the ideas who are generally identifiable as leftist. Foundations should be responsible for a balanced application of their support. The normal checks and balances in our public life can be annihilated through one-sided foundation support of the forces calling for change. Obviously, change is often desirable and even necessary, but not per se. The uncritical support by foundations of the idea that we must have change for change's sake justified two recent Congresses in suspecting foundations of being agencies frequently favoring undesirable and destructive goals. Brilliant. Excellent section there. This is a really important little bit here that I really shouldn't be writing in this book. It's quite valuable. But whatever. I'm never going to sell it. Leftist. There you go. So there's a trend. There's a pattern. They only ever come out on one side of things. And then you wonder why today all your children go to university and they come out with pink hair and, flying the flags of other countries that they've never been to. Getting confused about chromosomes. And calling everyone literal Nazis. That's how you got the foundation. This is what I'm saying, right? It's the foundations. There are these organizations laid the foundations, which today's social structures and institutes and not just and philosophies and ideologies have been built on top of, So, excellent end to chapter 1 there. We're going to continue in a little moment with chapter 2, which is called The Power of the Individual Foundation. But one of the things that I didn't mention in the opening that Rene Wormser did talk about was how the foundations, the people who set them up, and he used the example of the Ford Foundation, could use a foundation to remain in control of their money. So they would give a massive amount of their money to the foundation, and then they would employ and hire and choose who would be on the boards of those foundations to decide, where the money would be invested or doled out or sent. I suppose they don't use the word investment, but I think of it as investment because, as I said, you want a return on your money. And then, when the patriarch of the family would die, then his children, his offspring, would take control of the foundation. So if they were to inherit that money, they might owe some tax on it. if he just left it in the bank account and then said, I leave everything in my bank account to my son. But if you stick it in a foundation that's tax exempt and you give instructions as to what this money should be spent on, what ideas it should be used to support and promulgate, knowing the things, the ideologies that stand in the way of you and what you want to achieve, you can attack those and break them down by funding the people who are ideologically opposed to those things. You see, so it's quite ingenious, really. It's very clever. And there was the account in the beginning of how Ford did exactly this. They protected a massive amount of their wealth by sticking in a foundation. And then I think when Henry Ford died, his sons took control of the foundation and took control of all that money. So we're learning that the justice system, the criminal justice system, think about that. This is criminal justice. This is justice for the criminals, right? The criminal justice system seems to be, they're not making the allegation in the book, but this criminal justice system seems to be working in cahoots with the foundations, and the foundations are almost unanimously pushing leftist agendas, pushing ideologies of the educational movers and shakers who, at this time, there's a very high likelihood were being influenced by the Fabian socialists. And that's what the whole book Fabian Freeway is about. How the Fabian socialists started in London, but exported themselves out to America, and then started spreading their messages and ideologies and worldview there. And of course, it's always progressive. It's always to do with workers' rights, which is labor, and pointing the finger at those nasty capitalists with their money, those industrialists who, and that's the surprising thing about it. And what I think trips a lot of people up is, like we mentioned at the start, why would the people who've made their money back and support the people who point their fingers and blame the people who make the money? Why would capitalists and industrialists fund anti-capitalist movements and thinkers and speakers? It's hard for people to wrap their head around it. But I think the explanation is because they know that this system can't last forever. They know that they've made their wealth and that they have to transition into the next phase of the system. And it's like a controlled demolition. You're getting people to work toward this controlled demolition. Meanwhile, you're investing in the solutions and you're investing in the infrastructure that's going to be used on the other side of that demolition. It's going to be rolled out to save people, right? Whether that's the technology, the surveillance, the data gathering. A complementary book might be Surveillance Valley, in fact, to hear about the military origins of the internet. Because it's all about controlling each phase and the transition between phases, because that's when you can lose some control, right? Remember Zbigniew Brzezinski in his book Between Two Ages is about this. It's about the hell that can occur as one system crumbles and we head into another. One era concludes and the next era is being born, and there's that time in between, which the quote he took the title of the book from says that time in between is like hell for the people going through it. But you got to go through that hell, that transitionary phase, and come out on the other side still in control. That's if you are wealthy and powerful and part of the parasite class. How do you remain in control through this transition where there's chaos, where there's stress and strife and anger and frustration? How do you stay in control as the system crumbles and breaks down and is demolished. Well, you got to plan ahead. You got to design the next system and install it for the most part before the current one is totally kaput. You can't start designing it and rolling it out in the chaos of the transition, right? You have to design it and roll it out way ahead of time. And that plays into the everything list, where he refers to David Rogers' Webb, his book, The Great Taking, which is all about the legislation and the laws that have been put in place to ensure that your assets are not yours. And that in the event of a financial breakdown, of a crisis, they will be hoovered up and scooped up and given to a class of people known as, what are they called? I think they're called the secured creditors. But now I have to look. It is in here. There's a little hierarchy. It shows where you are in the hierarchy and a list of people who have a claim. You're pretty low down in the list. That's the spoiler alert. Yeah, there we go. There it is. So in the event of some sort of big catastrophic financial kablooey, there are the secured creditors, which is not you. And then after that is the administrator liquidator fees. Third is the preferential creditors. Fourth is the secondary preferential creditors and the taxman. And then fifth is secured creditors with a floating charge. And then sixth is unsecured creditors, which is you. You are an unsecured creditor. And that goes for all your paper assets, your physical assets in a lot of cases as well. Unless you own it and you have control of it and you can defend it with a gun. You're not really the owner. And this has been put in place. This is the law. And it's been put in place gradually, slowly, through processes such as harmonization, providing legal certainty, safe harbor laws. It's quite an incredible story, and it's told very, very well in this book, The Everything List. But they're planning ahead. They're planning for this. The story is also told David Rogers' Webb's book, The Great Taking, which you can get for free from his website. I think it's just thegreattaking.com. Again, harmonization, collateral management, dematerialization, safe harbor for whom and from what. So they know this is coming. They know the fiat only lasts 60 years, maximum. And they know they got to manage that transition into the next phase. And it goes back, I think, to the foundations and probably even before. So a couple of comments we've got. Celine Lyon says, seems my comments are only visible if the live chat is selected. I always forget to do that. Yeah, if you go to the top, change it from top chat to live chat, because top chat is a sneaky little filter and it hides some of the comments. I always forget to do that. Thank you for the reminder. Steven says, hi Nick, just wanted to say thank you. I'm almost finished Fabian Freeway. I'm really enjoying your genuine honesty. Melissa connected me to you and you have sent down a few good rabbit holes too. That's awesome, Stephen. Good to have you here. Thank you for your kind words and your message. It's lovely. And I'm glad you're enjoying Fabian Freeway. It's a fantastic book. It really is. I need to go back and review that. I always say that though, and I just don't have time. Celine Lyon says, the History of Propaganda's channel comes up far down in the list of options, so he's being shadow banned. I can believe it. Celine Lyon also says, now they want to convince children that they are born in the wrong body and Big Pharma can change that for you. Yeah, just chop some bits off and take some of these synthetic hormones and insist everyone around you calls you a different name and change your wardrobe. And stop talking to anyone who tells you you're making a mistake. Easy. You will never regret it. And then along with the new era, says Celine Lyon, comes transhumanism. So it's not just the system that changes. They want humans to change. Yeah. They want humans to... there's a new system coming, but they know that it's incompatible with humans as we currently exist, with our humanity, with our desire to have free will and agency and make decisions. So they got to condition us. They got to perfect us to exist in their perfect system. It's Brave New World is, that's what it is. We'll be conditioned to love our servitude, as Aldous Huxley said. And that'll happen from birth. That'll be Bertrand Russell's conditioning, scientific conditioning of children from cradle to grave. We're managed throughout that whole time span. We're updated and upgraded with whatever new thoughts or beliefs or values we need, right? At the moment, it's multiculturalism and diversity, and that's the name of the game right now. And if you're not into that stuff, then you're a far-right extremist bigot, and you can get arrested. Say the wrong thing on Twitter, because free speech is not a real thing that we do, and when we don't have it. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The humans have to be adjusted to suit the system that's coming along. And that goes back to Frederick Taylor. Is it Frederick Taylor? Taylorism. And his infamous quote, which was, in the future, the system will be more important than the human. Yeah, Frederick Winslow Taylor. Let's get his quote up quickly. It's a good one to remember. This is quite funny. I got a few different quotes coming up because I didn't specify which one I was looking for. So we'll just go over here. This one here just says, "Tell him to go to hell." Frederick Winslow Taylor. So that's a good one. But the one I was thinking of is this one here. "In the past, the man has been first. In the future, the system must be first," which implies the man will be second, right? This is in no sense, however, implies that great men are not needed. On the contrary, the first object of any good system must be that of developing first-class men. So you can read that in a number of ways, right? You might be like, well, you see, he says that the system should make all men to be the best that they can be. Or you could read it as only the first-class men are going to be developed by a good system. Meaning the social Darwinism view, right? The ones that are fit to rule. The wild men, as Charles Galton Darwin called them in his book, The Next Million Years. Only those men are going to be developed by a good system. Everyone else, you're not going to be developed, because you have to be conditioned and changed and altered and upgraded and updated to serve the system, right? So there you go. That's Taylorism. Frederick Winslow Taylor. Infamous quote there. So yeah. Total agreement. You're absolutely right, Celine Lyon. That's an excellent point. It's not just about progress in our systems. It's also about progress in the humans. Transhumanism and technocracy. They go hand in hand. Patrick Wood even wrote a book about that. I think it's called The Twin Evils of Transhumanism and Technocracy. But I might be getting that slightly wrong. But yeah, he's got this weird kind of dual two-faced skull on the front cover, which is kind of creepy. But let's continue with our reading. allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. If you want to support, send me an email at nick@hayesreviews.com or go to continuityofcontrol.com. Sign up for my free email series. Get edumacated on the history, on some of the history, on the very tip of the iceberg of this history. In fact, the quotes that I assembled for that email series are a primer. And it's a very, the emails are very short. They're not long and arduous to read. And I just packed as many quotes in as I could just to make it accessible and easy to show people, like, look, there's a continuity, there is planning, there is admissions and acknowledgements, and we can point to their own writings to get an understanding of the world, their worldview, and what they're trying to achieve and what they're trying to do to the rest of us. And that's the purpose of continuity of control. It's supposed to be normie friendly. It's supposed to be a first introduction, really, resource to these kinds of studies and aspects of reality. So there you are. Send it to a friend. Sign a friend up. No, don't do that, because they'll get pissed off and annoyed at me. So don't do that. Turb says, even saying stop this planet, I want to get off can trigger people these days. They didn't go for herd immunity, but they do like herd mentality. Yeah, well said. That'd be a good t-shirt. Herd immunity with a big cross going through it, and then herd mentality with a tick next to it. Or that meme, you know, that guy who's kind of like putting his hand up to the top thing and then like smiling at the bottom one. That'd be a good meme if there's any meme makers out there. I think that would go well. And Celine Lyon says, we live in brightly colored dark ages. Well, we're definitely living in interesting times, as the curse goes. I'd say we're living in rainbow colored dark ages. That might be a good way to put it as well. So let's jump into chapter 2. I don't know how far we'll get. I don't know how long the chapter is, but we might get through it. We'll see. 56. So it's about 14 pages. We might do it. It might be a good amount to get through and then wrap it. So the power of the individual foundation. Ramifications of the power. The giant foundation can exercise enormous power through the direct use of its funds. Moreover, it materially increases this power and its influence by building collateral alliances which serve greatly to insulate it against criticism. It is likely to find friends among the banks which hold its great deposits, the investments and brokerage houses which serve its investment problem, the major law firms which act as its counsel, and the many firms, institutions, and individuals with which it deals and which it benefits. By careful selection of a trustee here and there, from among proprietors and executives of newspapers, periodicals, and other media of communication, it can assure itself of adulation and support. By engaging public relations counselors, ethically and even legally a questionable practice, it can further create for itself a favorable press and enthusiastic publicity. So remember, whenever you hear public relations, father of public relations is, of course, Edward Bernays. Wrote a book called Propaganda, and you only need to read the first 10 pages of that book to get the gist. And I can't even spell propaganda. I've written propaganda. I put an extra N in there, haven't I? But Edward Bernays, I always forget, is it nephew of Sigmund Freud or grandson? Was the father of public relations. But I like that Wormser says this is ethically and legally a questionable practice, because it's all to do with manipulating people, which is lying to people. It's changing their perceptions and their beliefs about a person or a group or a behavior or a product. All its connections and associations, plus the often sycophantic adulation of the many institutions and individuals who had received largesse from the foundation, give it an enormous aggregate of power and influence. This power extends beyond its immediate circle of associations to those who hope to benefit from its bounty. Institutions and individuals are powerfully attracted to the policies of the foundation within their circles of interest, and as long as the magnetic force in the form of funds persists, are unlikely to change their orientation. The foundation's direct power is the power of money. Privately financed educational institutions have had a bad time during the period of rapidly increasing costs. Foundation grants have become so important a source of support that college and university presidents cannot often afford to ignore the opinions and wishes of the executives who distribute foundation's largesse. Foundation largesse. So you can see, you can kind of like, it's like a pincer movement. You can manipulate the currency and the costs and the funding and the money available to schools and institutions and educational efforts. And you can turn it down so that they have to turn to the foundations, so that the foundations can have that influence by attaching whatever strings they attach to the doling out of their money. Yeah. The grants don't come without strings and requirements and conditions. Such administrators will freely admit that they do not like to receive restricted or earmarked grants and would far prefer to be unfettered in their disposition of money given to their institutions, but they will also admit that they usually dare not turn down a grant, however inconsistent with their policy, priority of goals, or urgent needs it may be, for fear they might earn the displeasure of the granting foundation. The situation permits large foundations to exercise a profound influence upon public opinion and upon the course of public affairs. For academic opinion today, as the Rene Committee report put it, is the opinion of the intellectuals of tomorrow and will very likely be reflected into legislation and in public affairs thereafter. Yeah, you go after the students, right, because they're going to graduate and get jobs. So you program and condition the young people and the students because they're going to be working in these organizations in the future. That's the long-term, slow, Fabian, socialist, gradualist way of bringing about change. That's why getting hold of the students and their minds is so important. Nor is the control exercisable by a great foundation limited to its direct relations with the executives and trustees of educational institutions. Pressure starts at the very bottom of the academic ladder. A foundation grant may enable a beginner to attain the precious doctorate, which is the first rung. To secure such assistance, is it not likely that he will conform to what he may believe would please those who give him their financial grace? Then he becomes a teacher at a salary sometimes below that of an ordinary laborer. Without supplemental help through a foundation grant, he can support his family only in poverty. He cannot set aside the time or the money necessary to enable him to do such study, research, and writing as may advance him in his career. Is he then likely to run counter to what may be wanted by a foundation considering him for a grant? This teacher finds as he progresses in his career that he has few sources from which to increase his income other than the foundations. Without such accessory income, he cannot achieve those extracurricular but academic distinctions which give him prestige and advance him in the education hierarchy. These distinctions come often from research and writing. Great dispensing intermediary organizations control learned journals and university presses. They hold the key to academic publications and form an effective instrument of patronage. Foundations rarely impose conformity in any direct manner, but they often do so through the selection of grantees and the rejection or approval of suggested subjects and methods of research. An academician who is in with a great foundation can hope for advancement to the top, such as Kinsey. So if you're like masturbating young humans in a soundproof laboratory, then you'll be in with a great foundation and you can get almost $500,000 in funding. But if you want to study something about like marriage or Christianity or conservatism or the Constitution, then you're not going to be in with the great foundation, and you're not going to get much. You're not going to get any of the pie. Not even a small slice. You'll just get nothing. You just get rejected. So one who is not can still get there, but it's infinitely more difficult. As the Rene Committee said, quote, just as the president of the institution, whose main job today may well be fundraising, cannot afford to ignore the bureaucrat's wishes, so the academician cannot. Scholars and fundraisers both soon learn to study the predilections, preferences, and aversions of its foundation's executives and benefit from such knowledge by presenting projects likely to please them. This whole page, 2 pages, is really important. Foundation power poses a problem quite aside from the momentary preferences of the managers of these funds. These managers may be no less conscientious than public servants. But through the fact that they are free from the checks and controls by which public servants are restrained, there is less probability that their errors will ever be discovered, and if they are discovered, that they will be reversed. So next section here is how the power is administered. In small foundations, the trustees usually assume the actual work and responsibility for the examination of applications and the dispensing of grants. In the great ones, it is almost standard practice for the trustees to act largely as window dressing. They may exercise the full power of management and direction if they wish, but they do not do so. They go through the motions of control. They often debate issues. They frequently pass on and determine principles of operation. They consider and take action on many specific grants. But the limited time they devote to such work is not enough to enable them to exercise the degree of control and responsibility which their duty requires. It is not inattention. It is not an unwillingness on the part of the trustees to accept responsibility which creates this situation. It is the fact that most of the great foundations have chosen to operate in such complex fashion that it is impossible for otherwise busy trustees working for the foundation only part-time to perform adequately. So there's this deliberate, complicated, bureaucratic system in place which prevents the trustees from performing adequately. Innumerable errors of a serious nature have been acquiesced in by eminent and intelligent trustees merely because they have not had the time to study, check, and follow the detailed operation of the foundation sufficiently, nor have they been able to discover and weigh factors of importance which came to the attention only of the foundation's executive employees. The unmanageable volume of business which confronts the trustees of a great foundation does not, however, excuse that delegation of power so often practiced. Such a delegation may be in order in a business enterprise, where the failure of its directors adequately to shoulder responsibility results merely in an unhappy profit and loss statement. All that can be lost is money. Foundation responsibility is not merely financial responsibility, but, far more importantly, social responsibility. The power to venture into the realm of thought, to support and promote ideas, should not be delegated except in a minor administrative sense. If the volume of work becomes excessive, it might be necessary to increase the number of trustees and to expect of them full-time attention to their duties. An alternative would be to let unquestionably responsible institutions, such as universities, take over the function which otherwise would be delegated to foundation employees or subsidized intermediary organizations. In many cases, as Dr. Charles W. Briggs, Professor Emeritus of Columbia University, testified before the Reese Committee, the true operating heads of these foundations present a program to the trustees which is so general as to get approval and yet so indefinite as to permit activities which in the judgment of most competent critics are either wasteful or harmful. Even the formulation of glittering generalities is usually left to administrative officers, the selection and proposal of individual grants and grantees almost always. Where express approval by the trustees is required, they are all too often insufficiently informed, indeed so often rubber stamps. Such abandonment of trustee duties has led to the indefensible practice of leaving the selection of grantees to the professional managers of organizations created for the purpose of retailing the distribution of wholesale grants. An extreme instance of this is the Institute of Pacific Relations, itself a foundation and one of the retailers used by other foundations. To it, the Carnegie Corporation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and the Rockefeller Foundation contributed millions of dollars. Its record is now well known. The Internal Revenue Service disclosed in 1955 that it had revoked its tax exemption. Some years ago, after a detailed investigation of this foundation, the McCarran Committee came to the conclusion that the Institute of Pacific Relations had been virtually an organ of the Communist Party of the United States. It held that, at least since the mid-1930s, quote, the net effect of IPR activities on United States public opinion has been pro-communist and pro-Soviet, and has frequently and repeatedly been such as to serve international communist and Soviet interests and to subvert the interests of the United States. That quote is from the McCarran Committee report, page 84. On the board of directors, the trustees of the Institute of Pacific Relations, listen to this, were men of high caliber and excellent reputation. How then were officers of the Institute able to turn its activities to pro-Soviet objectives? Professor David N. Rowe explained this to the Rees Committee. Professor Rowe is an academician of the highest standing, recently on special assignment in Formosa. He had been a member of the Yale Executive Committee on International Relations since 1950 and was director of studies from 1951 to 1953. He is one of our foremost authorities on the Far East. Professor Rowe had himself been a director of the Institute of Pacific Relations for several years, resigning when he discovered some of its derelictions and found that he had no power as a director. The directors were dummies. I think it means dummies as in fake, not dummies as in stupid people. The organization was run by an inner group of its executives. This controlling inner group managed to assemble directors who would either do their will or be too lax in diligence to discover the true nature of that to which they gave their assent. Professor Rowe testified that the executives on one occasion had refused to disclose to the board the names of those whom they were considering for the position of executive secretary. Asked what he did about it, Professor Rowe replied, "What could I do? I was practically a minority of one. The board upheld their decision not to do this. It was not long after that, as I remember, that I resigned from the board. They had a monopoly, and they were bringing people like me in for the purposes of setting up a front and giving a different kind of colouring to the membership of the board." So this is how things really work, you know. Now let us look at the other side of this picture. Why did the trustees of the Rockefeller Foundation, for example, continue to make substantial donations to the Institute of Pacific Relations long after the time when, as the McCarran Committee indicated, there was evidence that the Institute had become an agent of communism? It is a harrowing story. Excuse me. In 1944, Alfred Kohlberg, a director of the Institute who had become suspicious of its activities, brought facts to the attention of the Rockefeller Foundation that showed beyond any reasonable doubt the real character of the Institute. Even after discussion of the criticized conditions, the Rockefeller Foundation continued to make substantial donations to it. There's a little footnote. Mr. Joseph Willits was head of the Social Sciences Division of the Rockefeller Foundation during the period in question. He was recently in charge of a Ford Foundation survey of the University of Pennsylvania. One wonders whether this survey will be as penetrating as the Rockefeller study of the Institute of Pacific Relations. Back to the text here. Its excuse that it wanted to help reform the Institute of Pacific Relations is not tenable. One does not go on making contributions to a pro-communist organization in the hope of converting it away from communism. One cuts off its support. Maybe if we just keep giving them money, they'll change. Not really. So continuing, the answer in the case of the Rockefeller Foundation must be that its trustees were not fully aware of what was happening. Like the trustees of so many large foundations, they left most decisions to their employees, the officers of the foundation. The results were disastrous for our country. The IPR probably had more to do than any other single factor with conditioning our people to abandon the mainland of China to the communists. Its influence even penetrated the State Department, there's that word again, and its support came chiefly from large, tax-exempt American foundations. Kenneth Colgrove, Professor Emeritus of Politics at Northwestern University. At the time of his testimony, he was on a temporary teaching assignment at Queen's College, had this to say before the Rees Committee about Foundation trustees. The large number of famous names on the list of trustees is due to an old superstition that our institutions must be headed by a famous group of men, and I will say frankly it is to impress Congress as well as the American people. to impress public opinion as much as possible. It is an old superstition. It's not necessary at all. Professor Colgrove, an authority of the first rank, who had for 11 years been Secretary-Treasurer of the American Political Science Association, elaborated, quote, "Yes, undoubtedly many of the trustees would not serve if they felt that they would be called upon to do much more than go to the meetings, hear the reports, and sometimes say not a single word. You would not have as brilliant, as lofty, as remarkable a collection of men as trustees if you required a little more responsibility on their part." So they just want to show up and nod and smile and listen to some words and go home and have an easy life, right? They're just willing to lend their name to this, but not actually do any work, not actually be responsible for anything, not actually carry any accountability for what's happening. They're just dummies. So the next section here is the foundation bureaucrats. In effect, then, most of the very large foundations are operated by professional employees who assume the functions of designing programs and determining and selecting grants and grantees. These functions are the essence of the fiduciary duty of the trustees. It was most distressing to the Rees Committee to find that such professionals, without themselves having fiduciary responsibility, exercise such vast power. Excuse me a sec. Got a tickly throat. Have a sip of tea. Hopefully. That will keep us going to the end of the chapter. We'll see. As Professor Colgrove testified, in the aggregate, the officers of these foundations wield a staggering sum of influence and direction upon research, education, and propaganda in the United States and even in foreign countries. The committee had before it a mass of evidence of this bureaucratic power. Even its predecessor, the Cox Committee, had such evidence. It had, for example, received a letter from Dr. J. Fred Rippey, professor of American history at Chicago, to which it apparently had paid little attention. Professor Rippey was incensed at the extent to which decisions of vital importance were left to foundation bureaucrats, and expressed this opinion of them. But I have never been impressed by the superior wisdom of the foundation heads and executive committees. The heads tend to become arrogant. The members of the committees are, as a rule, far from the ablest scholars in the country. The late Dr. Frederick P. Keppel, president of the Carnegie Corporation, once said that the officers of foundations steadily tend toward, quote, an illusion of omniscience and omnipotence. Foundation bureaucrats have become a unique class. That reminds me, since our last broadcast, I got a book, which I'll show you. I don't think I showed this last time, but I got this book, GILAS, The New Class. It's subtitled An Analysis of the Communist System. The whole theory behind this book is that the new class is the bureaucrats who are born out of the communism and have to administer the system, right? It says, this is a book on communism by a man who until recently was one of its heroes. It's a book which exemplifies and expresses the deep agonies, the desperate yearning of the Soviet orbit's disillusioned intelligentsia for intellectual freedom, for dignity, for true social and economic process, for a way out of the morass of stupid theories, bureaucratic claims, and cruel exploitations. Moving down a bit. Its impact far outweighs that of the ordinary anti-communist expose. It does not concentrate on dry facts which mean nothing to doctrinaire communists, and it does not try to prove something the communists do not wish to have proven. It's a political theorist manifesto revealing a fruitless succession of causes and effects, often using the dialectic method so much a part of communist thinking. Gilas presents his irrefutable argument proving why communism developed the way it did and why it cannot, under any circumstances, reach any of its socialist goals, why, on the contrary, it cannot escape its own contradictions of a theoretical workers' paradise and an actual oligarchy where the ruling class devours itself while holding down the masses in abject poverty, material and intellectual. So, yeah, I'm quite interested in reading that one because it's good to hear the analysis of somebody who was there. And that's a 1957 book as well. It's actually, this impression came out in 1958, the same year as Foundations. That's pretty good. But the bureaucrats, they become a new class, right? They become a new group. A unique class, as Wormser says here. They have their own interests in mind. They have their own motivations, they have their own networks, their own way of doing things, but they never really considered a class of people, the bureaucrats. In England, the civil service do get quite a lot of shit, actually. But in all the traditional theories, the capitalism, the communism, the socialism, the blah, 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 the bureaucrats aren't really talked about, just like the bankers are never talked about in those discussions. Funny that. But yeah, the foundation bureaucrats have become a unique class. Professor Colgrove testified that academicians fawned over them. Of course they do, because that's where they're getting the money from, right? So the late Professor Merriam, in his day perhaps the most powerful figure in the foundation world, once said, "Money is power, and for the last few years I have been dealing with more power than any professor should ever have in his hands." Dwight MacDonald gives a good view of these philanthropoids, another good word, or professional foundation administrators. A philanthropoid is the middleman, between the philanthropist and the philanthropy. His profession is the giving away of other people's money, and he is the key figure in most of today's great foundations now that the original donors are safely dead. Some 230 people are employed by the Ford Foundation. Most of these occupy subordinate positions or are delegated to special work, MacDonald continues. This leaves the 40-odd philanthropoids who, for all practical purposes, are the Ford Foundation. They screen the thousands of applications for grants that come in every year. They look into new fields for spending. They think up problems worth solving. The first problem a foundation faces is what is the problem? And select the institutions or the people to try to solve them. They carry on the negotiations, often protracted, and the inquiries, often delicate, that may or may not lead to a grant, and they follow up the grants that are made. They dictate the systolic flow of memoranda that is the bloodstream of a modern foundation. Through all these activities, and always subject to the final vote of the trustees, the philanthropoids determine that this enterprise of benevolence or scholarship shall be nourished with Ford money, while that one shall not. So that whole quote there is from a book called The Ford Foundation, The Men and the Millions, an Unauthorized Biography, published in 1956. It was first published as a series of profiles in the New Yorker magazine, but that is a book. I think it's a book that I want to get hold of. So I've got to come back to that page and look it up after. So continuing, these philanthropoids then are the men with the power. Wherever they go in academic circles, they are received with extraordinary respect and listened to with concentrated attention. The president of a great university will hang on their words, hoping to catch some clue to the possibility of a substantial and badly needed grant. A professor, eminent and loaded with deserved honours, will listen deferentially to every word of this young man whose opinions on academic subjects, relatively untutored though he may be, are of far more practical importance than those of his distinguished listener. A mere suggestion by one of these young men from the foundations can materially influence the direction of a project proposed by an institution or an academician. And to turn down a project suggested by this young man himself, that is far too dangerous for any university or professor to consider lightly. It is indeed rarely done. The risk is too great. I think of several trustees of grant foundations, men with whom I happen to be acquainted and for whom I have great personal admiration. They have genuine stature and deserve every bit of the success and acclaim which they have earned by intelligence, energy, and common sense in their own industrial fields. They are active or retired top executives of great corporations which were built partly upon their executive ability. Their extraordinary capacities for direction and their experience qualify them for an important voice in council in our society. They have, however, only the most peripheral understanding of many of the fields of activity in which their foundations engage. They understand neither the lingo nor the substance of the materials with which academicians work in these fields after a lifetime of training. If they are convinced, for instance, by a foundation executive that the foundation should enter the field of behavioral science or educational theory, it's interesting that they use that example of behavioral science there, they can do little more than approve of the generality of appropriations for the purpose and leave all else to the hired executives who presume to know how to act as intermediaries between the trustees and the field. The trustees are at sea. They have the intelligence, but not the time to absorb the subject. Thus, they cannot exercise judgment, but must leave this to the professionals whom they employ. Nor can they even check the work of the professionals. They can only transfer their power to them and hope for the best. Something is wrong with such a method of operation. Trustees who would direct great enterprises would never sanction methods of this kind in their own organizations. Just looking ahead to see how many pages we got left. We got 5 pages left. Then we'll wrap it up. Celine Lyons says, Trojan horse philanthropy. Yep. That's a good way of looking at it as well. So the next section is, it's not the final section for this chapter, there's one more. But the next section is the problem of bigness. In his Philanthropic Foundations, F. Emerson Andrews illustrates the financial power of a few big endowments. His figures are based on the number of foundations listed in directories, 4,162, which is clearly a low figure, and upon an estimate of aggregate wealth, $7 billion, which is at least $2 billion too low. But the comparisons he makes are nevertheless instructive. Of the 4,162 foundations listed, 77 in 1953 held $3 billion of the aggregate of $7 billion in assets. Among the 77, 6 reported assets of more than $100 million. Their combined value being $1.2 billion. These giants are listed as Ford, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Kellogg, Duke, and Pew Memorial. So it's that Pareto principle, isn't it, of the 80-20 rule, or something similar to that. Mr. Andrews listed another 7 foundations with assets running between 50 and 100 millions each. Some of the foundations are so closely allied in origin with some of the big 6 as possibly to be bracketed with them. Among these would be the Ford Motor Company Fund, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, so it's the same. It's still Ford, still Rockefeller, the Carnegie, still Carnegie. Well, the last 3 are all Carnegie, so there you go. Of the big 6, only Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Pew reported assets at market value. Consequently, we have good reason to assume that the combined value of the assets of the big 6 might be well in excess of $4 billion. It is probable that the Ford Foundation, for example, should have been listed at close to $3 billion instead of a mere $520 million. There is a powerful school of political scientists which contends that bigness per se is a danger to society. It maintains that the economic power of great corporations should be suppressed by dissolutions and breakups. Whole libraries have been written about the alleged threat to the public welfare in the form of the growth of giant enterprises. congressional hearings on the problems of small business, on mergers and antitrust issues, and on proposals to apply discriminatory legislation against large corporations have filled tens of thousands of printed pages a year. Again, the risks, the problems have been known for a long time. So when you've got these gigantic multinational, international corporations that have resources and turnover that's bigger than most countries' GDP, they've known what risks allowing this to happen poses, and it's happened anyway. So that's why this is the kind of thing that shows you and reminds you that there's nothing accidental about the world we live in. It's been designed this way. It's been purposefully planned to be this way, and they've planned the next phases that we're going to be going into as well, because you wouldn't plan it out to 2026 and then just be like, oh, we'll just freewheel it and make it up as we go along from that point onwards, would you? Like, excuse me. Sorry, I'm getting a bit wheezy. Let me just clear my throat. Yeah, it's ridiculous to think that you would just plan it out to a certain point and then just improvise from there on. So all planned, all purposefully designed, and all the effects and the outcomes are known. It's kind of like how, think about, we're talking about Rockefellers here. Think about the pharmaceutical industry and how they give you a medicine and they say, okay, this medicine is to help with such and such, usually some kind of symptom management, because they never cure you. They just manage your symptoms. And when you take this medicine, you got to watch out because it has some side effects. So there's main effects and side effects. Well, there's no main effects and there's no side effects. There's just effects. That's all there is. There's one category of things that happen in you when you take it, and all of these things are called effects. And it's kind of like that. They'll say, oh, well, capitalism gave us all these gadgets and gizmos and all this comfort, material comfort, but there's all these unfortunate side effects of capitalism as well, and communism did all this good stuff, but there was all these unfortunate side effects of communism. That's kind of how Zbigniew Brzezinski talked about it in his book Between Two Ages. He was like, oh, these are unfortunate side effects, meaning the millions and millions of people who died. There are no side effects. There's just effects. There's just the outcome that the system produces. And this is one of the ways, along with syllogisms, this is another way that people hide and squirm out of and away from reality by making this arbitrary demarcation between the intended effects and the just unexpected side effects that we never could have predicted and we never could have planned or foreseen. Don't let people wiggle out of things by using that old chestnut. That's my advice. But yeah, back in the 50s, there was a powerful school of political scientists who were warning against bigness per se. Did it make a difference? Well, no. Anyway, continuing. Under the influence of the anti-bigness philosophy, the Supreme Court, in dealing with antitrust cases, has veered toward a position that bigness in itself constitutes a restraint on competition, and competition is a sin. There is thus a tendency to consider that bigness in itself, when it is capable of corrective restraint, is sufficient justification for remedial legislation, even when there is no actual evidence of unfair competition or of collusion. A subschool of the anti-bigness political scientist has recently found a new problem of bigness to attack. Many corporations, which formerly engaged in only one activity, have now seen the wisdom of diversification and have entered various, sometimes unassociated industries. Some opponents of bigness now wish to prevent diversification, even when the collateral activities of a great corporation give it no preponderant or even commanding position in the collateral industries. Their basic objection is no longer unfair competition or restraint of trade, but mere bigness and the fear of the aggregate power which goes with bigness. Yes, this is a really important section as well. I'm just going to have to... Great chapter, by the way. I'm sure you listening have already figured that out and didn't really need me to point out that, make that redundant comment there, but there is a clear analogy between bigness in industry and bigness in the world of foundations. Each of the great foundations can exercise influence in the field of ideas so powerful that it justifies a fear of mere bigness. The argument can be made, as it has been made in relation to big business, that it is not necessary to prove that the power reposing in bigness has actually been abused. It's enough to show that the power exists. Professor Harold D. Laswell of Yale is one of the academicians upon whom foundation patronage has been bestowed lavishly. He is one of the influential experts in the social sciences on whom foundation managers have so often relied for the selection of projects and the allocation of funds. All right, we gotta know this name because he's doling out the funds, right? Harold D. Laswell. Here. In 1956, his prestige, largely on the basis of his position in the foundation world, contributed to his election as president of the American Political Science Association. It seems fair to assume that his inaugural address, delivered in Washington on September the 6th, 1956, may represent the position of social scientists enjoying foundation support. Speaking of economic control, Professor Laswell asks, quote, "Shall we rely upon a 30-40-50 rule to guide public policy in regard to the permissible degree of market control permitted to private interests? For example, when one interest has 30% control of output, shall it be subject to special regulations designed to nullify the side effects of power that go along with economic control? When one interest rises to 40%, shall we put governmentally appointed trustees on the board of directors? At 50%, shall government trustees predominate?" He says further, "The same approach, the search for rules of proportion, applies to every institution and personality pattern in a body politic. What are the optimum proportions of community resources to devote to elementary, intermediary, advanced, and ultra-advanced education, to research and development in science and technology? The validity of the political theory which opposes bigness in business enterprises is, of course, subject to grave question. Such enterprises operate in a competitive economy and under an effective system of counterweighing power. Business is subject to checks and balances by pressures from labor, from competitive or substitute goods and services, from government, and from the political action of many citizen pressure groups. If, however, there is any justice in opposing bigness in business enterprises, there is even more in fearing bigness among foundations. The generally accepted practice of matched grants multiplies the impact of foundation giving. This technique of fundraising results in a far-reaching Gleichschaltung of public charity, a general adoption of the policies of the large foundations which offer the matching. Foundations owe their existence to the public. It makes a sacrifice to give foundations tax exemption, assuming that the public will in turn be properly rewarded for its generosity through an application of the tax-exempt funds to the public welfare. Good one. For this reason, if no other, foundations must have the approval of the public to carry on. Yeah. The public indeed would be fully justified in applying legislative restrictions on foundation operations where there seemed to be danger to the public welfare. The problem of foundation bigness per se may thus arise seriously to concern the general public unless foundation managers become alert to the inherent dangers of bigness by avoiding, in the future, the techniques of joint planning, of joint support of intermediary organizations which thus achieve commanding positions in the world of ideas, and of eliminating or destroying counterweighing competition in the support of ideas. The conformity which these techniques foster is socially unsound and highly undesirable. It stems partly from the use of a common group of, quote, experts, and I'm glad Wormser was back in the 50s doing like experts in these little, inverted commas. It stems partly from the use of a common group of experts, and the common application of funds to the support of the intellectual fashions of the day instead of applying the venture capital theory equitably by giving proportionately at least to the preservation of the values of the past. Now, no, of course not. Of course, there is no money going into any individual or group or movement that wants to preserve the values of the past, because everything is forward, everything is progress, everything is change. Vote Labour, change, right? Very biased, very one-sided, very lopsided. By design, though. It's not accidental. So this is the last section of chapter 2. It's about 2 pages long. It is the corporate foundations. Related to the problem of bigness is that of the foundation created and maintained by an individual business enterprise. Such foundations are comparative newcomers on the American scene, but are rapidly increasing in numbers. There are now perhaps 2,000 of them. Their aggregate capital is very substantial, as a corporation is granted an annual income tax deduction of up to 5% of its net income. For philanthropic donations, such corporate foundations could grow to immense importance in our society and could indeed overshadow the individual created foundations in the course of time. Limited by lack of time and funds, the Rees Committee made no attempt to study these corporate foundations. Yeah, they did mention in the introduction that time and funds were not abundant, so they had to restrict what they investigated. Nor have I collected any material regarding them, but any comprehensive study of foundations in their relation to our society would have to take corporate foundations into account. The corporate foundations have so far escaped the type of criticism leveled at some of the individual created foundations because they have generally avoided controversy and have confined themselves to direct grants and to objectives often local with which the public could not well quarrel. But several interesting criticisms of them have been made, which do merit consideration by thoughtful students of the general foundation problem. There is the basic concern of some regarding the operations of juridical persons in the field of charity. In this instance, juridical persons created by juridical persons. That difficult and obscure problem I shall leave to the philosophers and jurists. 2 forms of criticism have appeared from within the corporations which have created foundations. Stockholders have objected to the dissipation of profits through donations to a foundation, which they say are really the property of the owners of the business, the stockholders. Labour, on the other hand, has sometimes complained that if the corporation is so affluent as to be able to create and maintain a foundation of its own, it could afford to pay higher wages. Yeah, but you don't get as much bang for your buck, do you, if you pay your employees? A third form of complaint comes from competitors, who assert the unfairness of enabling a great corporation, through the tax deduction vehicle, to advertise itself and promote public relations, and thus to take unfair advantage of competitors. Complaints of this kind have been registered against the Ford Motor Company. On the other hand, a foundation can operate in reverse in regard to public relations. There was a time when many people in the United States refused to buy Ford products because of the antics of the Ford Foundation created Fund for the Republic, and even for some of the acts of the Ford Foundation itself. A graver criticism lies in the fact that while federal laws prevent combinations in business in restraint of trade, it is possible for foundations to act in concert to the attainment of common objectives. Such objectives might conceivably be political, in which event combinations of huge foundations created by huge corporations could constitute a potential highly dangerous to our society. It is to be hoped that those who manage the great corporations will be alert to this danger and carefully avoid it. Yes, hope indeed. Unfortunately, hope is not a strategy, as I heard many times at work. So that brings us to the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3 is the concentration of power, which we are going to be continuing on the next live stream. I hesitate to tell you when the next live stream might be, just in case it doesn't happen because something else happens instead. But I will aim to be back with you. Yeah, we'll just have a look ahead as well. Chapter 3. Oh, no, we just did that. Sorry, chapter 4 is social. No, hang on. It is chapter 3 next. The concentration of power. Social Science Research Council, the American Council on Education, the Interlock, and the Influence Foundation Managers. And then after that, we're into this chapter on scientism. That one I'm looking forward to. And this one, the foreign policy one, I'm also very much looking forward to that as well. What a great book. I'm enjoying it very much. It's aged very well, like a fine wine, in my opinion. And it's surprisingly candid in some of the admissions and the way, the frank descriptions. I'm saying frank descriptions, but unfortunately Frank can't be with us tonight on live for the live stream, but I'm sure he'll catch up on the replay. Yeah, the frank admissions, the very direct tone. It's written with a really, to me, it sounds like a very objective style. I feel like Rene Wormser was indeed the right man for the job. I think he's done an excellent piece of work here. I really do think he's done well because it's easy to follow. It's not convoluted. It's not confusing. It's logically laid out. The sections are separated with headings and gives you the quotes. And he brings in a lot of other writers and opinions and ideas, and he communicates very effectively so that I'm not struggling with his sentences and paragraphs and the structure. Like, remember Milner-Fabian conspiracy? Some of the sentences in that book were so long. They were hard to follow. Great book, though. Great book. But yeah, this is really good. It's turning out really well. I particularly enjoyed that whole last section on bigness. That was quite interesting to me. And the mentioning of the League for Industrial Democracy coming in, and how these things are vague. I think there's a level of ambiguity that goes along with the foundations, what they do, how they describe themselves, and the legislation that is supposed to limit them. It's very clear that chapter, what came out of it as well was the complicity of the criminal justice system. And this problem that he touched upon there about who gets onto these boards, these trustees, what are their other interests, what are their overlapping groups that they're involved in and that they might represent and they might have a higher loyalty to. And I think the similar problem we have in politics and corporations with their revolving door at the top, I think a similar thing is going on with foundations and the people who are supposed to regulate them and the people who are supposed to hold them to account. One of the things that Dwayne points out on History of Propaganda channel is that these committees and these commissions don't have any powers to make any changes or make any. All they can do is make recommendations, which can be ignored. And this is why you have the Cox Commission and the Walsh Commission and then the Rees Committee. And it's just carried on regardless, right? They do the investigation, they present their findings, and everyone's like, oh, well, that's really terrible. Yeah, that's interesting. We should do something about that. And then nothing gets done about it. It just carries on. So it gives you also just the committee itself and the commissions. You know, you got like the 9/11 Commission, for example, and the COVID inquiry. And all these commissions and committees and inquiries are part of the illusion of democracy, part of the illusion of you have some sort of control and agency over the system and you are somehow in charge. It's really just to keep people quiet and make people think something's being done as the plan unrolls, as things are push towards the digital technocracy of the future that we're heading into. It's always been the plan. Patrick Wood told us this plan, it goes back to the 30s at least, but I think it probably goes back. Somebody commented in one of my Rumble videos that it goes back to Atlantis. And that was the first technocratic, technological, total surveillance and control system that was rolled out. I have no idea if that's true. I don't know how anyone could know if that's true. I don't know how you would verify that. But I do think the desire to control goes back to the very beginning. The desire to have total surveillance over the very thoughts, behaviors, opinions, ideas, beliefs of everybody, I think that goes back to the very beginning, because it's just rooted in evil. It's just rooted in psychopathy and a freakish desire to dominate. And I think that's just a really ancient force in this reality, unfortunately. And so we're always being tempted and coerced and conditioned and changed and altered and brought along to acquiesce to these things. And it's made so hard to put up any kind of resistance because it's very different. It's very difficult to organize. It's very different to find other people who think the same way and view things the same way, because there's so much confusion and misdirection, and there's so much smoke on the battlefield of ideas, and there's so much money being poured into making sure that that is the case. Part of my experience over Christmas and New Year, this most recent holiday season, was to have a nice break from the internet. And to be honest, when it came time to come back, I was kind of wishing I didn't have to. Because having to navigate it all and the latest outrageous thing and the feeds and the accounts and the videos and the documentaries and the interviews and the podcasts, it's so tiring and it's too much. And it's designed to be that way. It's designed to leave you more confused and overwhelmed and tired and frustrated and freaked out and scared and nervous and insecure than before. So I didn't really want to come back. But every time I do set up a live stream and get going, I really enjoy it, and I'm really glad I did it. Tonight was no exception. I've enjoyed reading Rene Worm's book to you and with you tonight. It's been very good indeed, and I'm looking forward to the next one. I just don't have time to do much else online these days. But I hope the reading was useful in some way. I think it was, because it's a very good book. We're on page 56. I forget how long this is. It's about 350 pages, something like that. Yeah. So we've got about 300 pages to go. It is going to take a little while. But it's an easy read. I don't think it's going to be overwhelming. I don't think it's going to be difficult. I think it's going to be an easily digestible, hard-hitting, memorable, and effective piece of analysis that we can all learn from, and we can all refer to and mention to other people when we talk to them about the way the world really works. Because you've got to lay your foundations before you can build your Tower of Babel on top. So, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews if you want to support. Continuityofcontrol.com if you want to sign up for the email series that I put together. Nick@HayesReviews.com if you want to send me an email or get in touch. It would be great to hear from you. It would be lovely to receive some fiat currency support, even though the fiat currency is basically going to be worthless very, very soon. But liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing, that all makes me feel good watching the numbers go up. We hit 2,000 subscribers. That's pretty awesome. I never thought that would happen, and it happened. I would say probably maybe 1,900 of those are bots or fake. So we've reached 100 people. But it's really not about the numbers going up. It's really just about doing something, contributing in some small way to truth, to learning, to understanding, to dispelling some of the fear and the concern and the confusion. I mean, the concern's still going to be there, but the confusion, we can get rid of some of that. We can clear up some of the contradictory information that we get fed. And we can step into a bit of awareness by way of some knowledge to increase and improve our understanding, and then we can share it with others, and that is called wisdom. So I hope that this has been a bit of a contribution towards pushing the needle in that sort of direction. So we've got a few comments. Celine Lyon says, take this pill and your morning sickness will be reduced, as will the limbs of your newborn. Yeah, exactly. See, just side effect. Kelly Nora says, very freakish. And glad you did come back. I'm glad I came back too. I've got another break coming up, unfortunately, but I'll tell you more about that on the next broadcast. Celine Lyon says, we're still using the Gregorian calendar, which has no bearing on reality whatsoever. It's really that bad because people have no connection with reality anymore. Yeah, a month or moon cycle is 28 days, not 30 or 31. What a joke. Right. Yeah, and then it brings a whole new dimension to the phrase daylight robbery, doesn't it? We've been messed with on a grand scale, whether our calendars, our history, our science, our medicine, our education, all of it. It's all phony, fake, bullshit. So be careful out there. I'm going to sign off. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching on the replay. Thank you for supporting in any way, shape, or form. And thank you for being here. It's lovely, indeed. I still love doing this. My favorite thing to do is read books on a live stream to you excellent people. We got a lot of books to get through, so please support the show if you can. allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. We are going to play you out with a little bit of guitar music, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much indeed. It's been lovely to spend 3 hours. Yeah, we're coming up on 3 hours now. It's been lovely to spend this time with you. Take care of yourselves and each other. Do uplifting, wholesome, health-giving activities as much as possible, and spend time with the people who matter most to you. Cherish every moment and tell them you love them. Tell them you're proud of them. Tell them that you enjoy being with them and you're grateful to have them in your lives, because we all need to hear those things more often, and it makes the world a better place. So take it easy, and till next one, God bless.